understand, we can't deal with the Russian threat, the Iranian threat, and the China threat at the level of defense spending we're at right now, which is a little less than 3%. We can't get there. We have got to increase it.
General, thank you, and we will stay in touch with you as this development continue throughout the day. Thank you so much.
Council later today to vote on holding an emergency session
And now
General Assembly.
I think we want to bring
President
back
Zelensky said that
who's
he
in
talked
Kiev
with
at the
the
moment.
UN
We're hearing the
Secretary
air raid
General about
sirens are
stripping
sounding
Russia
there.
of the
Let's bring him back in.
on the
Trey,
UN
what is the
Security
latest? What are you
Council.
seeing and hearing?
Yeah, Benjamin, moments ago, air raid sirens sounding across the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, indicating this Russian air campaign is continuing against the city. Off in the distance, we sounded what appeared to be like artillery, some explosions, and once again, the civilian population going underground. Church bells have also been used to warn people, along with fire sirens inside hotels and other buildings here. Anything to get the population to be aware of what is happening and make sure they can get to shelters immediately. But again, just moments ago, sirens are sounding in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, and off in the distance, some explosions indicating that the Russians at this hour are continuing their campaign against the city.
Before we go, nearly 2,700 Russians have been detained.
Trey, thank you very much for that, and we'll wait to see whether or not this is the next step, the next push for them to try and take over that city. We'll come back to you as the news warrants it. Thank you, Trey. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, Benjamin. A Fox News alert now. China appears to be changing its position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, what Beijing is calling for now, and what it could mean for U.S. foreign policy. And the Pentagon saying Russia is clearly frustrated by its lack of momentum in Ukraine. Is that what's prompting Vladimir Putin to raise the specter of nuclear war?
In his own country for what he's doing. And we encourage those people to continue to make sure their voices
Fox News Live is brought to you by
Ambassador
Pacific
Linda
Life.
Thomas
Over
Greenfield, thank you so much
150
for your
years
time.
of strength.
Appreciate
That's
it.
what they're trying to do now.
Thank you very much.
Receiving trains at around
And now I want to bring in the Ukrainian ambassador.
Ukrainians on board. They're coming into the train station. They're making it across the border. It's a very perilous journey for these people on the train. It's coming from Lviv, but it's a journey that should take about 2 hours. It's taking 16 hours now because for various reasons they're having to stop because of fighting nearby, waiting until it's safe enough to continue on with their journey. And these trains are loaded with women and children and people who are really distraught over having to leave family members, particularly husbands, brothers, fathers, behind in Ukraine. Take a listen.
I want my husband to be with me.
Where is he?
He's somewhere in Lviv. He did not did it through the border.
Can't get out.
Yes, we tried everything. Yes, I feel like an ocean of blood is. It is catching me up. When you leave your family and think that your father, your mother are dead in Kyiv, and then you go to the border and they take everything away from you.
We stay only in Ukraine, so we stay only.
You stay on the train
the
entire
train
time.
all the time. We don't eat, we don't drink, we don't move.
No one checked our passports.
It's been terrible for us.
We were told that 4 more trains were waiting at the Ukrainian border trying to get into that train station today, earlier this afternoon. Just to give you a sense of these numbers, again, Alex, you mentioned the big number, 368,000 Ukrainians crossing over into neighboring countries since this conflict began. But take a look at the breakdown. Almost half of those, 156,000 people have arrived in Poland. Now, Poland has said that they will take as many as are able to come. But to be frank, these small border towns are having trouble processing these huge numbers of people. And again, they're growing day by day.
Presenting Home Chef Oven Ready.
The numbers were 77,000 in a day. On Friday, it was 47,000. So you can see those increases day by day, Alex.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Kelly, I don't know how you do it, because just listening to that one story, one that I'm sure you've heard repeated time and time again, I'm practically fighting back tears. It is so heartbreaking what these people are being forced to go through for no reason whatsoever. Kelly, thank you. What to make of all this breaking news in Ukraine? Congressman Jason Crow of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee is going to weigh in next.
After a night of explosions, the Ukrainian government is still in control of Kyiv, even as Russian troops move closer to the Ukrainian capital. According to the British Ministry of Defense, the bulk of Russia's forces are within 20 miles of Kyiv, but the Ukrainian army and air force are putting up a staunch resistance and inflicting greater casualties than the Kremlin anticipated. And our Pentagon team reports that the U.S. is seeing indications that the Russians are growing increasingly frustrated by their lack of progress. Joining me now is MSNBC military analyst and retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey. General, thank you so much. A lot of people are surprised by the time it is taking Russia to get to these capitals. And as I just said, our intelligence thinks that Russia is pretty frustrated by it. What exactly is going on, and what can you make of this?
Well, the thing you have to really focus on, it seems to me, is the incredible political courage of President Zelensky and his senior civilian leadership, never mind the Ukrainian military, which is putting up a fight. They have courage. They're calling up their reserves. People are taking part in militia defense units, all of which indicates a very strong stance by the Ukrainian against this massive Russian assault. We got to remind ourselves, this is day 4 coming up of the assault. The Russians have made no serious attempt yet to capture Kyiv, Kharkiv, or other major metropolitan areas. They're on the outskirts, but we're seeing a reconnaissance, GRU, Spetsnaz units trying to encircle and destabilize the capital. If the Russians go after Kyiv, and they probably don't want to, it could be a bloody mess and a terrible
position you have to this policy in Germany is from the far right Alternatives for Deutschland. They're maybe 5% in approval. They're marginal. The fact is that Olaf Scholz's own party, the Social Democrats, were the ones they called the Russia understanders, the Russlandverstehers. They were the ones that were saying, no, we got to work economically with these guys. Don't worry about national security. They have completely changed. I think this is a dramatic moment, something that you wouldn't have expected at any point after the wall came down in 1989. We're in a different world with Germany right now.
I want to ask you about China as well, but one more question on Germany. With this change in terms of defense, spending more money, committing to that, and sending lethal weaponry to a conflict zone, will he also change the energy security and the way that they get their power in Germany?
They're going to have to. Now, I don't know that means they're going to go back towards nuclear, which is what the right answer would be. Mm-hmm. But certainly it means they're going to take a significant economic hit, much more than other major economies, because so much of their gas is dependent on Russia. They figured out that they can make that work for this winter, and for next winter, well, hopefully they'll be able to get a bunch of contracts from Qatar, from Azerbaijan, from Japan, and some support from the United States. But I do see this as a tipping point that they understand, and I've been told this directly by high-level German officials, that Nord Stream 2, as well as their broader dependence, energy dependence on Russia, was a strategic mistake that must be changed.
All right, and Ian, in just the minute that we have left, could you tell me your thoughts about how China is positioning itself right now? It's been a little bit of a mystery. I think there was a lot of assumption that they would be in lockstep with Vladimir Putin. That doesn't seem to be the case. What do you make of it?
At the beginning, when Putin met with Xi Jinping in Beijing at the Olympics, they were much more in lockstep. They're not today. They've been putting a lot of pressure privately on the Russians, and you've seen some of that publicly, to say, we don't want the end of the Minsk agreement. We recognize Ukrainian territorial integrity, and we expect negotiations. I think that one of the reasons why Putin shifted from we won't talk to the Ukrainians unless they completely disarm to just this morning saying no preconditions, we'll talk to the Ukrainians, is because they really annoyed China. And China is Russia's most important friend on the global stage. They have to at least pretend to go through the motions on real negotiations, Dana.
Well, with friends like those, right, Ian? But you're a friend of ours. That's and of our show. Thank you so much. Benjamin.
See you, Dan. Yep.
Thanks, Dana. And a Fox News alert now. Vladimir Putin is frustrated at how slowly his invasion of Ukraine is going. That's what U.S. defense officials told reporters in an off-camera briefing yesterday. They said Moscow was not expecting to face this much resistance in Ukraine. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin lived in Moscow from 1996 to 1999. Jennifer, what should we know? What can you tell us about how Vladimir Putin and those around him operate?
Well, first, Ben, let me just update you on what I heard from a senior defense official just moments ago. You're right. They are saying that they are not seeing as much progress and that the Russians are getting frustrated, and that this announcement about the nuclear forces being put on alert is a sign of how frustrated Putin is. And also, intelligence analysts have told us that Putin is attempting to escalate in order to de-escalate. So keep an eye on those talks that are supposed to take place along the Belarus border between a Ukrainian delegation and the Belarus delegation tomorrow. We were always told that Putin would try to negotiate while fighting, but it was notable in the discussions with the senior defense official that Russian forces are still 30 kilometers outside of the capital, Kyiv, even though some of their forces, a few special units, have made it their way into the capital. But very significant that in the past 24 hours, they have not made any progress along those roads into Kyiv. They're also seeing some sort of siege taking place up just east of Chernobyl, at a town where we saw incredible scenes of people standing in front of Russian tanks. They're concerned. The defense official that I spoke to is concerned that the Russian forces may be preparing a siege on that town, and that would lead to escalating civilian casualties. You asked me about my time in Moscow. I lived there in the 90s when President Yeltsin was still in power, but he had just, before I left Moscow in 99, had promoted Vladimir Putin, the former KGB agent who lived in, who had been in Eastern Germany and then in St. Petersburg. He had just promoted him to be his prime minister, and that was a really significant moment, because what I remember was the brutality at which, at the time, I didn't understand all the dots and how to connect them. But now, in looking back, I recognize that he was laying the groundwork for an invasion of Chechnya at the time. And there were some apartment buildings in Moscow that were blown up in the middle of the night. And it eventually led back to the FSB in Putin's hand. So Putin has been a brutal leader. He's been involved in numerous poisonings that we've documented over time of his opponents. And certainly those around him are part of that. And they are now being sanctioned. Benjamin.
Very interesting, Jennifer. Thank you. And you wonder if this is Putin 2.0, whether he is following the same playbook or whether it's different. But your analysis there, thank you for it. We appreciate it. Dana?
Well, Russia's coming at Ukraine from every angle 4 days into its invasion. But Ukrainian officials now say the war began weeks before boots even hit the ground. Cyber attacks and misinformation aimed at throwing the country into panic. Congressman Mike Gallagher on that next.
What's my safe flight story? I'm a photographer, and when I'm driving, I see inspiration right through my glass. So when my windshield cracked, it had...
It's part of what you do in the world to kind of get by and to achieve his goals. So he has no qualms at all. Lie, truth is kind of all the same to him. Let's also know that he has a history of adopting old Soviet tactics of inviting people for peace talks and discussions and then imprisoning.
Maybe recognizing, he should be recognizing that this is not going well for him. NATO has come together. Germany is now saying they're going to be investing far more in their military capacity. They're providing more weapons. The world is behind the people of Ukraine. Look at those brave people in Ireland stopping the Russian ambassador. We should be doing that all over the world, by the way. The Russian government is a pariah. And the entire world should be protesting and letting Russia know how badly they're seen on the world stage.
The U.S. and its allies just announced new sanctions on the Russian central bank and plans to remove some banks from the international SWIFT banking system. Was that the right move? And what more, you mentioned some things, but what additional steps should the U.S. be taking?
Well, keep cranking that up. As Mitch McConnell said, you can't get the sanctions too high. At the same time, recognize that for the sanctions to be most effective, you want them to be shared with our allies around the world. We want to all be together on this, so we can only go as fast as everybody wants to move together. So that's That's critical. But those sanctions will have an impact. I also noted in that release from the White House that we and our allies are going to be going after the oligarchs, going after their mansions, going after their yachts. This is very good news and the kind of thing we ought to be doing. And I also think consideration of a humanitarian zone, a no-fly zone, to allow people to escape from Kyiv, if that's necessary, may be something that we need to consider as well. But let's keep on cranking up the sanctions against what is an evil regime.
I don't know if you just heard my interview with the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the UN. She seemed to not think that a no-fly zone is a good idea if it means that there would be U.S. troops involved in enforcing that fly zone. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it's something that you consider, and you may want to negotiate it with the Russians and with our allies. You may decide that this is something that would be done by the UN or by us, but clearly the humanitarian demand may be such that we will look for a way to allow the mothers and children that are currently being huddled in subway stations to be able to find refuge. And look at the people of Poland, how heroic they are, providing the clothing and the housing and the food for these refugees that are pouring into their country, and also in Romania. Look, this is one of the greatest demonstrations of good versus evil that we've seen during our lifetimes, and the demonstration of courage. I mean, look at Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin. Here he is in this behind this huge table in this big white room. I mean, it looks like a mausoleum.
Outgunned, smaller force that can beat a larger one because they have the will to fight, the will to survive, they have higher morale, and they're fighting on their home ground. And that's the situation the Ukrainians are in right now. But they can't do it without our support. They can't do it without international support. They need ammunition, they need weapons, they need supplies. They can't win if their guns run out of ammo. We have an obligation to send that to them and help them out.
And last question to you, sir. On that note, NATO has activated its 40,000-person response force. So what does that mean for U.S. troops? What could potentially trigger putting U.S. soldiers into combat?
Well, this is the first time in the history of NATO that rapid response force has been activated. So that's a significant moment for sure. So U.S. troops will be an element of that 40,000 member force. And really, that force is meant to protect NATO countries. So in the event of an attack on a NATO country, of which Ukraine is not a member of NATO, then that would activate the response force. That's what's called Article 5 of the NATO Alliance Treaty, that an attack on one member is an attack on all. So that's really what could draw that force in, and hopefully that does not happen. I would be surprised if it does. But NATO is doing what's necessary to protect its members, which is what the Charter is all about.
All right, Colorado Congressman Jason Crow, thank you so much for your time, sir. Much appreciated. As campaigning for the midterm elections begins, a new poll asks, which party do you trust more?
Not only continues to wet the bed, but also shits on something like that on the back of the car might give the child a little more incentive. We start tonight with a Fox News alert. It's early morning in Kiev. After a long, tense night of airstrikes where officials in Ukraine say a civilian oil depot was targeted, Ukrainian President Zelensky remains defiant, refusing to evacuate the Ukrainian capital as his forces prepare for another day of war. Trey Yingst is live for us in Kiev. He has the very latest. Trey, what's going on over there?
Another tense night in the Ukrainian capital. You can see the sky behind me. It's a little bit orange, and that's because there is a fire raging just south of the city after a Russian missile slammed into an oil depot. This is the type of scenario that's been playing out the past 3 days in Ukraine, not just here in the capital, but across this country. Larger cities like Kharkiv, the second largest Ukrainian city, also taking heavy fire tonight. There were gun battles in the streets yesterday. That continued into today, and even an apartment building that had people inside hit with a Russian missile. Take a look at the scene earlier today. We were in the streets of Kyiv to get a better look. It looks like we don't have that video, but I'll describe it to you here. There were basically cars that had been shot up. They had Ukrainian troops in them, and they were met with these Russian forces who were trying to make their way into the city. And you could see bullet holes in the cars and blood on the ground. And then we got to an apartment building that was hit with a Russian missile, and it was totally destroyed in one area. debris all across the road. And this is really the scenes that are playing out across this capital city and across this country as Russian forces continue to advance. And there's no sign at all of it stopping. So civilians here are picking up arms. We saw lines of people waiting outside of a police station very close to here. And one member of parliament who told us he was going to the front lines to fight said they were handing out weapons like candy. The civilian population is getting ready to fight alongside the army to make sure they can push back those Russian troops. Back to you.
Trey, first, I know you hear it a lot, but I want to sincerely thank you for your incredible journalism over there. What you're doing is really a service to this network and the country. But question, have you sensed an escalation? We see this attack on the oil depot tonight. Question one, have you sensed an escalation? Question two, what's the Russian troop presence like, if any, on the ground there in Ukraine? We see video, and it's not very specific as to how far they penetrated to the capital. Are there sentries? What does it look like on the ground?
There are thousands of Russian troops in Ukraine as we speak. They are targeting major population centers like Kyiv and Kharkiv, the first and second largest cities in Ukraine. As for the amount of Russian troops inside the city limits of Kyiv, we know there are some Russian troops here. They've been trying to make their way into the city, but they've been using like reconnaissance troops. That's really the only way to describe it, because it's not the main forces of these tanks and armored vehicles that have been pushing into this country. Those troops are just a few miles from the city, and the concern is once they have these scouts come in and see how much resistance they're going to face in this urban warfare environment, then they would follow up with those other forces. And we understand, according to U.S. defense officials, that only about 50% of the population, or 50% of the troops, that have been on the border of Ukraine are actually headed into the country right now. So there are still many troops that President Putin of Russia could decide to push in. But again, he will face some fierce resistance if he decides to do that and move forward with this operation trying to take the capital city.
Trey, last question. I'll let you go. You've been very busy, I know. And again, we appreciate it. What's the food supply situation in Kiev? I mean, obviously, this is a massive tragedy. We have to think just practical stuff. I mean, food deliveries aren't going to happen like they ordinarily do. I heard you say before earlier there were lines queued up to get into grocery stores. What's the supply situation like?
It's a great question. Food and fuel are the two things that are quickly going to get cut off. And it's going to make this situation spiral downward even quicker than it already is. We have seen people in line at grocery stores trying to get any supplies they can get their hands on. But remember, the Russians are not just targeting this city from one direction. It's a three-prong approach trying to take over the capital of Kyiv. So it's very quickly starting to cut off the supply lines coming into the city. So while you see these lines for food and for gasoline inside the capital, that has a population of nearly 3 million people, very soon they are going to run out of those things. And when they do, it's going to add pressure to this situation. And there's really no telling what comes after that. The international community is not going to have any way to get humanitarian assistance into the city. And when people are going hungry and they are worried about the survival of their family, it changes the dynamics. And it is certainly a concern for this civilian population operating inside the city and just trying to go on with their lives and survive.
Trey, thanks a lot for your time. Please stay safe over there. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
I'm still the guy who can inflict enormous damage across the world. Now, does that mean he's actually going to do it? We hope not, obviously. There is this discussion you just had with Jason Crow and that people like Marco Rubio, who also have access to intelligence, are having about his mental state. Is he balanced? And the idea that you're sort of rattling a nuclear saber seems kind of unbalanced at this point.
Yeah, scary to say the least. What about President Zelensky, Peter, who agreed to send the Ukrainian delegation to meet with Russia's right there along the border with Belarus? I mean, not actually in Belarus, but right on the border. So now that Putin has shown his cards on Ukraine, is there any viable off-ramp for him, and would Putin take it?
Well, look, you can always take an off-ramp if you're an autocrat like Putin. You can define it any way you want. You can say, I've achieved
for us.
How important is it to make sure that there is access to the internet, both in Ukraine and for the people in Russia who disagree with Vladimir Putin's move here?
It's critically important. We know that Putin is actually ratcheting up controls on access to platforms like Twitter because he doesn't want his own citizens to see the brutality and chaos that he has caused. So one thing that would make sense to me is for American social media and tech companies to put in place a simple rule, which is that when it comes to regimes like Russia and China, who of course deny their own citizens access to information and these platforms, we shouldn't allow their government officials, their propagandists, their apparatchiks to have access to those platforms. That, to me, would be a constructive step forward and a way for American social media companies to start regaining some of their moral clarity when it seems they've lost it in recent years.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, thank you for joining us on this Sunday. We appreciate it. Ben?
Thanks, Dana. Well, next, hitting Putin where it hurts. The US and the West are now imposing the toughest sanctions yet on Russia by removing some of its financial institutions from a key international banking system. But will it be enough? The glaring loopholes critics are pointing out.
Well, I've said all along that we should have been doing this pre-invasion up post and the lethal aid pre-invasion up post. But here we are. And the fact is, I'm glad
consequences if they get wrong.
Well, I actually think they've had a pretty clear-eyed view of each other now these last few weeks and months. And you can argue about whether President Biden went into the administration fully appreciating just how much Vladimir Putin was going to come to dominate. But in the last few weeks and months, when they have been warning about his intentions with Ukraine, be in the face of this kind of aggression.
Okay. Peter Baker, unfortunately, I have a bunch more questions, but not the time to ask him, which you know I will make up for it next Sunday, my friend. Thank you, Peter. Donald Trump doubles down on his unabashed praise for Vladimir Putin, while Russian forces step up attacks on Ukraine. As for President Biden, what do you think Trump said? In a moment, the comments that are drawing out
annexed the Crimea, believes already what he thinks he's going to get out of this administration and sees an opportunity to be able to do this at the least cost. We need to operate from this point forward that Putin is standing by his words, and that means that every nation that was under the Soviet Union's influence or that was actually part of their territory is at risk and is a threat, and that threatens the United States and our allies. So, the statements that he made over the past several days, threatening the United States, threatening NATO, threatening our Western allies, are only made good if he can continue to build and strengthen his military, and sanctions can have an impact on it. But our sanctions have to go to technology. They have to go to the ability of him to build up his military network, what he's doing with hypersonic weapons, what he's doing with cyber attacks, what he's doing in building up his ground forces and their capabilities. All of this can be impacted because he needs technology from the West to do that. And we need to make certain that he doesn't get it. Well, I don't think U.S. troops should be engaged directly, but we do play a role here that is very important. We should be giving intelligence to Ukraine so that they can more effectively defend their own nation. We should be giving them lethal weapons so that they can fight. They've already been very impressively fighting today for their country, which is an independent country from Russia, a validly elected democracy. Those things are important for us to do. That this administration should be doing more of them. They did not. The Obama Biden administration did not rise to that occasion after Crimea was invaded and annexed into Russia. This is an opportunity for us to stand with a democracy and give them the tools they need to defend their own country. Vladimir Putin has very openly threatened the West and the United States. He's specifically included in his exercises leading up to invading Ukraine a nuclear weapons exercise, which of course places the United States, our cities, at risk. Whenever you have a leader of a nation violating international law and openly threatening the world with weapons of mass destruction, we are entering a very difficult and very dangerous time. This is a time where we need to stand up, show strength, make certain that we put Putin back in his box, help stop this aggressiveness, and hopefully return the world back to an area where, as the Secretary General of NATO has said, there was peace in Europe.
For the Russians, those radios are critically important. And then, of course, all the stuff that our allies have from their Warsaw Pact from that Soviet era. There are planes that could backfill Ukrainian losses. There are artillery that could backfill Ukrainian losses. And even the stuff that we were providing to Afghanistan is now sitting in storehouses, needs to get there, and it needs to get there right away.
And Congressman, you are coming back to session this week. How much will the United States Congress do to provide some of what we just heard from Colonel Vindman?
Well, I think we're going to have unanimity around supporting Ukraine basically in this moment. We've all, I think, been inspired by their resistance. We understand that we need to provide them with the tools to defend themselves and also to punish Russia. And so wherever we were in terms of the Congress a few weeks ago, that has completely changed now. I think we're going to see a bipartisan response to this. And so now we need to do the things that Colonel Vindman is talking about, providing the Ukrainians with the tools that they need. Some of it should have been done earlier, and I think we know that, but now we need to get it in.
Hey, Susan Glasser, as somebody who spent a lot of time in Russia, when you hear that President Putin is putting defense forces on high alert, including the nuclear arsenal, what does that tell you?
Look, this is an incredibly dangerous moment. It's an enormous crisis inside Russia now as well for Vladimir Putin, and the stability of his regime, which has lasted for more than 20 years, is something he put everything on the table with this extraordinarily risky move. And there is a great potential for it to blow up in his face. And I think when you see this incredible image of the leader of Russia, with his two military commanders, the defense secretary and the head of the general staff sitting 15 feet away from him, it's got a late stage dictator feel to it when he says, raise the alert of the nuclear forces, Dana. We need to be very concerned about this. It suggests that things are not going according to plan for Vladimir Putin. And it suggests, remember, he said in his speech when he announced this unprovoked aggression on Ukraine, he suggested, and don't you screw with me, you in the West, because we have very powerful forces beyond what you've ever seen. But it's one thing to deploy nuclear rhetoric. I think he's really trying to reestablish a kind of red line with NATO and the United States. that his own actions have kind of...
I'm sorry, I just want to comment on the nuclear stuff because it's really important. He's trying to accomplish through nuclear coercion now what he couldn't establish through facts on the ground, through the performance of his military. We should remember there was a long history of a Soviet Union with nuclear saber rattling, and we should not be intimidated by it. The rules of there's a well-established playbook and a well-established way to operate between U.S. and Soviet forces that Vladimir Putin knows. He's a KGB officer that we've forgotten. We need to relearn those. And this nuclear signaling is a critical component of it.
But Alex, what I would say, though, is that we are right now at a more dangerous juncture point than we were even at many periods in the Cold War. We have fewer agreements between the United States and Russia governing strategic encounters than we did at that time. We have contacts that have frayed.
But I think what's important is actually Putin's aggressive, reckless actions have united the Europeans and they've united the U.S. This is the most unified the U.S. has been around Ukraine in decades. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, in 2019, I was at DOD when Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was raising the alarm about getting military aid and security aid to the Ukrainians. Most Americans didn't understand why that mattered then. They're seeing these fighting forces, they're seeing this animating hero that is President Zelensky, and they're realizing these are pro-democracy people standing up for their borders. And I will say that the best thing in this moment is just the united front that the West is showing against Russia.
It's really important to discuss this nuclear question because this is what he's relying on. Does the U.S. have the nerve to maintain its resolve? Now, we're actually not the ones that are going to decide this issue. It's the Ukrainians that are fighting. They've seized the initiative. He's trying to threaten us on other things like economic support. Those are the things that he's concerned about. But we have to remember that this is part of the playbook, that Putin is not a madman. He's not suicidal. He has no interest in waging nuclear war because that's mutually assured destruction. But he's using it as a tool to intimidate us.
You were in the region a month ago or so. Do you agree? He's not a madman?
Well, I think that we have to, be concerned, but not be intimidated, because Vladimir Putin is riding the tiger right now, and the problem with that is you can't get off what the tiger eats you. And so I agree with Susan that this is maybe in many ways a more dangerous moment than we were in even in the Cold War. There is no Politburo. He's the modern czar now. He's the one making every single decision. And I do think that as these economic sanctions bite, and they are going to bite, and they are biting, as this becomes existential for his reign, that the threat level will go up. And so we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, Dan, a final point on that. Vladimir Putin is escalating because again and again, his bullying and escalation has worked. And he has used violent force before. Remember, this is someone who's invaded his own territory in Chechnya with a brutal war. He has invaded other countries. He has killed his opponents. He has assassinated them. He has eliminated legally and in other extra legal ways all opposition inside Russia. So escalation has worked for him again and again over 20 years.
But it's lessons of impunity that he's carrying forward. It's lessons of not being accountable that he's carrying forward. So we're in a more dangerous situation now than we have been in a long time because we didn't have the nerve to push back. Now we're at this crisis point, and we have to maintain our nerve because there's nowhere else to go. These are now vital national security interests. But once we get past this point, we'll re-baseline the relationship in a much, much more healthy manner where we're staking out our ground, we're protecting our interests, and he's not going to be able to get away with intimidation. It is dangerous, but we need to hold our ground.
Absolutely correct. And he vastly underestimated the collective will of the Ukrainians and their fighting capabilities. We're all familiar with the concept of asymmetric warfare, but what we're seeing is asymmetric will. Where you have the Ukrainians, they are defending their homeland, where they live, their life, their democracy, their freedom. They're outmanned, outnumbered, out-aerial supported, but they're winning. And, listen, things are still very tenuous. We don't know where this will end. But I think the world is united around this powerful force, and I hope that the aid is going to come from everywhere it should, supplemental in Congress as well as our European allies.
And I'll just say, when I was there, I met a young woman named Alicia who told me that she was going to get her white wine and her Kalashnikov and defend her country. And at the time, I believed her. Looking her in the eye, I believed her. And we're actually seeing that now. And it really is remarkable. It really is. And I think they're fighting for democracy around the world. And they're on the front line of it. But that's why they were invaded.
Real quick, President Biden is giving a State of the Union address in front of Congress, obviously, this coming week. What are the stakes?
This is an incredibly significant moment for the Biden presidency. His approval ratings have, really, they're in the dumps where only Donald Trump is the only other president who's been this low 1 year into the presidency. It's not clear. Americans are rallying around Zelensky, but you continue to see a real partisan divide, even inside on the question of Ukraine and Russia. You see many Republicans criticizing Biden for that, while at the same time praising Zelensky. So it's a reset moment, Dana, but I don't know that anything can change Americans' opinions right now about President Biden.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Fantastic.
As Russian forces close in on the capital city of Kyiv, what does this mean for the rest of Ukraine? Let's map it out. All right, so we have a map here. This shows kind of the fighting that's happened so far. What we see here is that most of the fighting is in the east, is in places where we knew Russia would be or coming in from. The main thing happening right now is the city of Kyiv still belongs to Ukrainians. And so with that, we're going to bring in an expert panel of military generals. Let's bring in our military leaders, General David Perkins, retired commander of the Army Training and Doctrine Command, retired General Keith Kellogg, Fox News contributor and former National Security Advisor to Vice President Pence, and retired Brigadier General Don Bolduc, U.S. Senate candidate and Army veteran who served 10 tours in Afghanistan. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this morning. And let's just kind of talk about what are the obstacles and challenges in front of the Ukrainian army now, or the entire country of Ukraine, as we talk about urban warfare and civilians picking up arms. I want to say that the first challenge is logistics. And General Kellogg, I'll go to you first on this. Do you see a way for us to actually send weapons and munitions and just logistics in general into the country to support this?
Yeah, I do. And thanks for having me, Joy. Look, I think President Putin has tremendously underestimated Zelensky and the Ukrainian forces that are now fighting. Yeah, there's a Shakespearean quote, cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war. And I think he forgot how to fight. He should have come at him in a massive way. He didn't, which is great for the Ukrainians. I think the Ukrainians are fighting back hard, and there's incredible great leadership by Zelensky. His comment this morning, I don't need a riot, I need ammunition. That's great, and it shows his tremendous leadership, and it's inspiring the Ukrainian nation. Here's how the United States can help out. This is where the president calls in as director of the CIA and issues a presidential finding, and he says, look, you need to help out with paramilitary into Ukraine and help with ammunition, and he can do it. It'll be covert, or clandestine, but that's a way to help them out. They are showing that they deserve our support and our help. It's thrown Putin off balance. The longer this goes, it's the worse for Putin. And if he cannot pull this off, then I think he'd better increase his bodyguards, because I think they're going to realize it's a pariah as a leader and he's a pariah as a nation, and he can't stand that. I think that's the reason why we're hearing this morning of more BTGs. Those are battalion tactical groups. Each one around 800 people are coming in out of Belarus. That's his exploitation force, I think, that he intended to use later in the fight, and he has to use it to subdue Kyiv, and I don't think he can do it. I think it's reaching a point now where you look at those people fighting on the streets, and David will tell you this too, from being in when he was in Baghdad. I'm telling you, armies don't like street fighting in cities. It absorbs units, and it's hard to do.
General Perkins, I'll go to you on this. We've shown graphics here on Fox that kind of show a list of the amount of soldiers for one country and the other, the amount of tanks, the amount of planes. When you talk about training and doctrine, when you talk about how we're going to fight a war with your expertise, it's not really a one-for-one when we're talking about Ukrainians having the home field advantage and urban warfare. These, what we, I guess, would consider waking up this morning and seeing a win as far as Ukraine holding on to its capital city. Is that a one-for-one win, or is this more dependent on how Russia is currently fighting and what they could eventually do?
Well, that's a great point. And to build upon what Keith said, having had the honor of commanding a large armored force like the Russians have, going into a capital to effect regime change, the two most important things are, as you asked before, logistics and timing. You have to do it quickly, because historically the advantage always accrues to the defender. Historically, we say a defender has a 3-to-1, maybe a 6-to-1 advantage just by being the defender over the attacker. The second thing is, we talk about logistics. It's not just supplying the Ukrainians with logistics, but it's cutting off the Russian logistics. This is a very large armored force, very dependent upon fuel and ammunition. And if the Russians don't make their timelines, that means they can't establish what we call the lines of communication, which means they can't establish their logistical capability, which then it starts to compound itself and you start to grind to a halt. So when I'm looking at what's been reported with regards to casualties the Russians have lost, both in personnel and in armored vehicles, it does not look good for them. This is not occurring as quickly as they planned, and every hour it slows down, the advantage accrues to the Ukrainians.
General Bolduc, you're running for Senate here in the United States. You've seen how our government has responded. What would you do differently, or what would be your advice to our president right now, someone who's commanded troops 10 times in Afghanistan, as far as what we should be doing or how we should be handling this today? Not just what we should have changed, but how we should be handling it today.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I think both generals set the table really well on what the Russians are doing and the Ukrainians. But my biggest concern right now is the resistance and the resistance phase that we're going to have to go into. The Ukrainian people will resist the Russian occupation. They will not allow Russian rule or civil order. They will bring NATO into the conflict. This will bring NATO into the conflict directly, because we're going to need to support it. And then so we need to be aware that the logistics, lethal aid, and potentially sanctuary support in NATO countries is going to be something that's going to bring us into the conflict. And it may give Putin a justification to attack NATO countries, because he feels that this is supporting the Ukrainians in a way that is a direct threat to him. So I believe this is inevitable, and I don't know what we're doing. I think General Kellogg said, yes, presidential finding with the CIA. We also have our special operation forces. And this is the advice that I would be giving the president right now. We see what Putin's doing. We see that the Ukrainians have the resolve. We need to invest in that. But when we do, we have to have the resolve and the will to follow through with it, because Putin will react.
Gentlemen, as general officers in the military, your service to our country is a debt we can't repay. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your analysis. And let's hope this resolves quickly.
And the answer was nothing from start to finish.
Mr. Chairman, we're out of time. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Thank you very much for watching, and for being on. The news continues next.
Just as Russia targets more of Ukraine's infrastructure, a reported missile strike blowing up a civilian oil depot just outside of Kyiv, and we are seeing heavy fighting in the streets of the country's second largest city. Meanwhile, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice reacting on Fox News Sunday. She says Vladimir Putin may have bitten off more than he can chew.
He was always calculating and cold, but this is different. He seems erratic. It was always a kind of victimology about what had happened to them, but now it goes back to blaming Lenin for the foundation of Kiev in the Russian of Ukraine. So he's descending into something that I personally haven't seen before.
And we have Team Fox coverage. Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg is standing by. Peter Doocy is at the White House, but we begin with Trey Yingst. He's reporting live from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, and it's about 8 p.m. there. What's it like, Trey?
Dana, good afternoon. The Russian Defense Ministry says they've hit over 1,000 Ukrainian military targets, but they haven't talked about the civilian targets getting hit by Russian missiles throughout this city and throughout this country. Tonight, we've heard air raid sirens, much like my colleague Benjamin in Lviv has heard. The capital under attack. Many people underground going for cover wherever and whenever they can. This comes as Russian missiles in the past 2 days have hit significant infrastructure, not only in this city, but across the country. You mentioned that oil depot just south of Kyiv that was hit overnight, causing flames to really fire into the air and glow up the entire night sky. Now, yesterday morning, there was an apartment complex that was hit here, killing 2 people after that Russian missile slammed into the residential building. And we hear these reports of fighting outside of the city, often sporadic gunfire as those Ukrainian forces try to push back the Russian troops attempting to enter this city. Now, the mayor of Kyiv was interviewed tonight by the Associated Press, And basically, he was asked about the situation and whether or not there would be the evacuation of civilians from this city. And he responded with an ominous response. He said that the city is surrounded. That is what Ukraine and the capital is dealing with right now. You mentioned other cities like Kharkiv, the second largest Ukrainian city, under heavy fire tonight. This war continues despite talks of a ceasefire negotiation possible between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Tonight, there's no indication that is working, and the conflict moves forward. Dana, Benjamin.
Right, thank you so much. Now watch this. All right, and Russian troops are being met with fierce resistance in Ukraine, officials suggesting Vladimir Putin is frustrated by the lack of progress and that Russia could be facing a much longer war than it bargained for. Let's bring in Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. He is a former national security advisor to Mike Pence.
CNN's Nick Robertson and Kylie Atwood joining me now. Nick, let me go to you. You're in Moscow. Does it seem that Putin's move is a legitimate threat? Talking about this nuclear
extraordinary escalation. I think what this is a message to NATO. And we've heard President Putin talk about Russia's nuclear deterrence before, when he actually early on when he launched this assault on Ukraine. I think that the idea from his perspective is to message to NATO, not, as he has said, not to interfere, because he understands that he may be able to win this war, although it's looking more challenging for his forces than perhaps he thought. He may be able to win it, but with the support of NATO, that changes the balance quite considerably. Now, just to explain a little bit, Russia's nuclear deterrent is on a high state of readiness at all times. There are restrictions on the system. President Putin can't just press a button. It doesn't quite work like that. We don't actually know what President Putin meant when he said
it's about not just about ending the war in Ukraine, but about this man, Boris Nemtsov. He was one of the leading opposition figures here in Russia. He was shot dead on this spot 7 years ago today. And we'll just spin the camera around and you can see where it is. Right outside the Kremlin, shot dead right outside the Kremlin 7 years ago today. People were arrested, but his family felt those responsible were never adequately prosecuted. But this really gives you a flavor here of the anti-war sentiment. No to war. I'm just going to walk along here with Lee. No to war up here. More no to war. No to war. Look at all these flowers. I mean, this is the number of people that are coming out. We've seen them all day. A Ukrainian flag here as well. All day, people coming and laying flowers. 1 flower, 2 flowers, 3 flowers. And over here, more anti-war logos. That's the sentiment. Now, a lot of people in this country still do support President Putin. And we've heard for the first time today, the Russian Ministry of Defense admit that some of their soldiers have been killed and wounded in Ukraine. That also is a change. But this talk about the strategic deterrent, the nuclear deterrent, that raises the stakes, certainly puts more pressure on the situation in Ukraine. But as you can see, so many people in this country laying their flowers right outside the Kremlin. One message, it's right here, no to war. That's the message they want to communicate here. Fred?
All right, Nick, and those no war sentiments coming at great risk, as we know already hundreds of people there in Russia, in Moscow, have been arrested for contesting the war and being outspoken.
It is Vladimir Putin's decision on whether he will stop what he's doing and listen to the voices of the world, the voices that have condemned him, or he will continue. And if he continues, we will continue to apply sanctions. But at the same time, we were preparing for just this action. We hoped that the Russians would listen to the pressure that we were putting them under, but they didn't. So they have to continue to feel additional sanctions and additional pressures on their economy, and they will feel the pain.
Now, Alex, we heard also today from White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who was asked if President Biden has spoken today with President Zelensky. She said, and I thought this was interesting, not yet. The president is currently in his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware, attending a memorial service for a family member who recently passed. But obviously the president also working on his State of the Union address. I've been told by an administration official that the president, amid all the busy activity this week, picking a Supreme Court justice, dealing with this Ukraine response, was working with his top speechwriter, his top political strategist, Mike Donnelly, on rewriting portions of the State of the Union address to incorporate some of these developments in Ukraine. It'll be interesting now, almost 48 hours away, the president's first speech to a joint session of Congress, the first State of the Union address, how this factors into that as well.
Well, I recollect the
sure,
film
on
The American
Russia
President,
to pull back, to put more
I think
essentially prices that they have to pay so that they can potentially change the situation here. And I also think when we're talking about the U.S. force posture in the region, it's important to note the Biden administration has
and then you have the humanitarian crisis.
No
you have the
U.S.
people
troops
fleeing.
are going to go
That's what
on
we're
the
seeing
ground
here as well. And
in
just
Ukraine.
yesterday we saw
Ambassador
thousands of
Thomas
Ukrainian
Greenfield,
women
said
and children,
also
some of them on
this
foot,
morning that applies to
fleeing
the
with all they
airspace
can
as
carry,
well.
just trying to escape to the safety of their neighboring countries. Take a look at what we saw. The women and children of Ukraine are fleeing, hundreds of thousands on the move, trying to get out however they can. The road leading to the Polish border has become a sea of people trying to escape. The exodus from Ukraine is well and truly underway. This line snakes back about 20-30 miles. It's taken some people 4 days to get this far. The UN say 120,000 people have so far fled the country, but it is feared that number could rise to 1 million, maybe 5 million, if the Russians continue their push in this westward direction. Only women and children are allowed to cross the borders now.
Family, война, мужчины, война. Там Киев,
Kiev, the men. Your men, Kiev. And the women, children, they go this way. Men from the ages of 18 to 60 are sent back, told to defend their country. Many fear they'll never see their loved ones again.
We had a plan for life. We were choosing like a kindergarten, a school for the baby, and now like every plan is gone.
It's possible not to meet him again, to meet your relatives, your mom, dad, your grandmas, so your relatives. Just maybe your goodbye will be the last one. Just look here, look around. It's not oppression, it's a real war. And it's just like a threat to the whole world. Today it will be Ukraine. What country will be the next? Nobody knows. He's crazy. He's just crazy.
Along the route, some people have run out of gas. They have simply abandoned their cars. Now they're walking, hoping to find shelter on the other side, but many just don't know where they're going next. And Dana, if I can make this personal for a second, I have 3 young daughters of my own, and as we drove down that line of cars for hours and hours, and you look into the eyes of these families, it is devastating. Many of them didn't really think this invasion was going to come. They left in such a hurry. They'd been told that perhaps it wasn't going to happen right up to the last minute, and they left not knowing where they are going to go, where they're going to stay, taking with them what they can carry. It's a humanitarian crisis, and if this war drags on and on, that will continue to rise. The numbers of people who have already fled, about 350,000 now. And again, that fear that it could rise to 4 million, 5 million, which is why the next few days, Dana, are so critical to see if this escalates or if Putin tries to find an off-ramp. We just don't know at this moment. Trying to predict what he will do is impossible.
It's incredible to hear their stories and to think about maybe they just had a few moments to grab whatever they thought that was the most important thing they could put in the suitcases that they had, and trying to keep the children from being fearful. Did you notice that part of it? Yeah. I think that some of the kids we've seen are smiling. Like the parents are doing as good a job as they can, even while their hearts are breaking.
Dana, the remarkable thing is that in conflict, you often see the resilience of children. They are often too young to really understand. It's the parents who understand the full weight of what is happening and how their lives are being changed forever. The children take with them what they can grab, their toys, and they can bounce back and start again. And you see it in refugee camps across the world. You see it in front lines. They are resilient, and it's a true testament to human nature that they can pull through. It's difficult for the family.
And the only precondition should be, please withdraw your troops from Ukrainian territory.
So don't you suspect, again, not getting into the mind of Putin, but doesn't anyone kind of suspect that Putin must be stunned at this kind of defiance, this bravery coming from Ukrainians?
Very brave and courageous through all this.
I
and
think
he
what
calls
probably
Russia's
surprises him is the bravery of the everyday Ukrainian.
He is calling on the UN to deprive Russia of its vote in the UN Security Council. Question to you, sir. Do you agree with that? And what is the likelihood that the UN even considers that? Do you think it gets addressed in today's UN Security Council meeting, or is that something that would be delayed for a broader discussion?
Well, this is an unprovoked attack on a sovereign country by Mr. Putin. As a result, a lot of people have lost their lives already, and more are going to lose their lives. We've already seen civilian targets hit. What Mr. Putin has done violates every international norm. He needs to be held fully accountable.
I am a small business owner trying to find other small business owners.
Issued personal sanctions against Mr. Putin. That is why he should be held fully responsible for his actions, including within a criminal court for international violations of human rights. All that, I think, needs to be on the table, and we can evaluate exactly how we proceed with accountability. But to me, he's the person who has caused this misery, and he needs to be held fully accountable.
And you meant...
Older Karen. The rush to Kiev, a capital under attack. As we headed for the city this morning, there was little moving, apart from Ukrainian troops. But the Russians are watching from the skies, ready to strike, as they did here, just an hour outside the capital. Well, this is what we've come across on the road to Kiev. This convoy was obviously travelling to the city to be part of the defence of Kiev. This is an air defence missile system. It was hit yesterday. The smoke is still rising here. And here too, after an early morning strike on a block of flats near Kiev's Giuliani airport. The authorities here say it was a Russian missile strike that killed 2 people. It could have been many more, but plenty of locals had fled or taken cover in shelters. Yuri Shevchuk, who lives nearby, says the West must help Ukraine.
I wanted to say for you, for your governments, because that we are in need, urgently in need, as soon as possible, as much as possible. We are in need anti-aircraft missiles, we are in need anti-tank missiles, we need ammunition.
Is there any message that you would wish to send to President Putin?
I wanted to say to President Putin that only one way for him, it's way to hell.
Well, this is what Kiev woke up to this morning. All of this destruction is in a residential area in a European city. And there is a real sense here now that nowhere in the capital is safe. And so, much of Kiev now looks like this, still standing, but bracing for impact.
Всім доброго ранку, українці.
Ukraine's embattled president, Volodymyr Zelensky, took to the deserted streets, shooting a selfie video to reassure his people.
Значить так, я тут.
I am here, he said, and we will not lay down our arms. Far from it, we found Ukrainians taking up arms, forming volunteer brigades to defend the city alongside the local police. This volunteer, who goes by the nickname Maloy, said, "I don't want to live in Russia, and my brothers in arms don't want that either. We will defend this city, or I will die." The volunteers are looking for Russian saboteurs, said to be already in the city. Nearby, we met Nino, out walking her dog and venting her fury. We demand an end to the war, she says. We can do it with sanctions. We must isolate the aggressor country. It terrorizes the whole world. With Russian forces at the gates, some are still fleeing the capital. For now, the city remains in Ukrainian hands, but the battle may be just beginning. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, this evening, in a major shift in policy, Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Germany will deliver weapons to Ukraine. These are set to include 1,000 anti-tank weapons and 500 Stinger surface-to-air missiles. The government in Berlin has also indicated it could now back plans to cut Russia off from the SWIFT international payment system. Our Europe editor, Katya Adler, joins us from Brussels. Katya, how significant are these announcements?
Oh, it is really, really significant. I mean, we heard from the German Chancellor himself. He called this a watershed moment. You know, Germany traditionally, because of its role in the Second World War, has been very wary about getting involved in military conflict. But this aggression by Russia on Ukraine has put the German government under real pressure at home and also abroad from other Western allies. So Germany will not only be sending weapons directly to Ukraine itself, but it's also lifted some restrictions on German-made weapons owned by other countries, and so they can help Ukraine as well, like, for example, the Netherlands or the Baltic states, who have been waiting as well. And as you mentioned, I mean, Germany had been very opposed to rejecting Russia from SWIFT. That's that global financial transaction network. But today, ministers said they were working on a way of how they could remove Russia in a targeted way. That, of course, is a move that is supported by the UK, the US and other member states as well. I think what we're seeing here is, you know, Germany, the EU as a whole, it's not exactly famed for very quick decision making. But what we're seeing right now in Ukraine is changing all of that. The EU right now is working on its third sanction package in a week. Whichever country I call, prime ministers or the president in the case of France, are talking all the time to other leaders in the EU, to the UK, to Joe Biden in the US as well. Tomorrow, EU foreign ministers meet and they'll talk about coordinating military action. And we're about to hear from the EU Commission Chief, Ursula von der Leyen, about action tonight. That will be any minute now.
Katya, for the moment, thank you very much.
When it comes to looks, I feel like a lot of times it starts with your hair. People want thicker hair, they want shinier, healthy looking hair. I'm literally obsessed with that.
Government officials and Mr. Looney, and frankly, this is just smart politics, but not necessarily good business. And I think his argument would be, over the long term, it's better business to have investors and, frankly, the public liking you rather than attacking you.
Short-term pain for long-term gain. Okay, thank you so much, Hadley Gamble, calling in from Moscow. Appreciate that. In just a moment, a glimmer of hope. Russia and Ukraine agree to hold talks. Plus, how might the invasion of Russia shape President Biden's State of the Union address on Tuesday?
His airplanes, his tanks, all of this machinery drove on the red light into my country, violated the laws of the country, international laws, and he is not punished. And nobody is even talking about his imprisonment. And he killed thousands of people, and it's his fault. These thousands of lives, both of Ukrainians and of Russians.
Would you support the idea, and this is a possibility, it is not confirmed yet, but we're getting some reports that there are talks about possible talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Would you support that?
There should be some talks, but just to give the Ukrainians the time, to stand, and for you guys to fly here as fast as possible and to just, hit Putin, hit Moscow. Because you are, how can you deal with a person who is lying to you all the time? It's ridiculous. I mean, you were already saying, about diplomacy, and he said, it's only military training. I'm not going to invade. He invaded. Then he said, I'm not killing civilians. Now he is killing civilians, hitting directly hospitals and kindergartens. And then he said that, look, have you watched Russian TV? What is in the news? They say that here we have Ukrainian fascists and regime, and they are just protecting peace in Ukraine. But what is going on? They are just, shelling Ukraine, just killing the people. He's lying right now. And why do you think that after these talks you can trust him? Why? Only, immediately the language of force. This is the war. And Putin understands only the language of the war. Stop being in this denial. It has started. The hard times, the dark times. I was in this state of denial 4 days ago when I was taking my kids to school and kindergarten. Everything was fine. But now I realize that I'm in the nightmare, and it's real, guys. It's happening just at your door.
Alina, we just talked to a few people that have decided to leave, and they are trying to get to Poland. Do you have any thoughts about leaving the subway and trying to get out of the city?
From time to time, I was panicking and deciding that what I'm doing, and here I have kids, and I putting them into danger, imprisoning. But I come back to the same decision. I stay here. This is my native land, and I will stay here with my brothers and sisters, and I will fight for Ukraine. I know being here with this kid, talking to you, to millions of Americans and other people, English-speaking people, this is my fight against Putin. And I think this is a very powerful weapon that I have.
Alina, I don't know if it's possible, but we would love to see, I don't know if your baby's asleep, but I think that our viewers would really love to see the face of this little one, if there's any possibility to see this beautiful child. There we go.
This is my powerful weapon. Basically,
yeah. It's a beautiful baby.
Basically, the reason why I am that strong is she, because she makes me be strong. And yeah, this is why I am like a dragon.
Fred, what is becoming
like
increasingly clear is that the Ukrainian military is really standing its ground and keeping the Russian forces at bay from this city. Remember, the most dire warnings were that this city could fall in 24 to 48 hours, but here we are on day 4 of this invasion, and that has not happened. There was some fierce fighting to the west, on the western edge of Kyiv, in a place called Bucha, and we have that video. You can see there a column of Russian vehicles, including armored personnel carriers, that were torched, burned out. Some have rolled over. They're on their side. This is evidence of the fierce fighting and pushback that the Ukrainian forces have given these Russian troops. You can hear there in some of that video someone speaking in Ukrainian saying, "They came to our land. I wish you all to burn in hell, and I would give my life if needed." That video has been verified by CNN and geolocated to that western edge of the capital. And then to the east of here, in the second biggest city of Kharkiv, that's right near the Russian border, there has also been some fierce fighting, battling in the streets. Russian forces are in that city fighting against Ukrainian troops, residents of that city being told to stay inside. That city has been a particular focus for the Russians because it is so close to that Russian border. So while the Ukrainians are managing to stand their ground, it is clear that the assaults on these two biggest cities of Ukraine continue. The Russians still very much trying to take control of this capital and to topple this government. Frederica.
But I'm sure there is some surprise that they are, confronted with the kind of resistance they're seeing, from the Ukrainians. Alex Marquardt, thank you so much. We'll check back with you. All right, with us now to talk more about the situation in Ukraine is retired.
Thousands of people now sleeping outside along the border with Poland. Some of them have very little with them because they could only bring what they could carry on the train from Kyiv. And so as this humanitarian crisis grows worse, the snow, the wet, the cold is going to become a possible disaster now. To those talks, and I don't mean to pour cold water on them, but we heard from the Ukrainian president earlier this morning saying it was a non-starter for him to go to Belarus because for a number of reasons. The first, Belarus helped start staging this attack. They are housing Russian troops. Some of those troops did push in from Belarus into northern Ukraine. There is that reason. The second reason is his security. This is a man who is leading the defensive, we're told, by the Ukrainian government in the center of Kyiv. Every morning he seems to put out a video. It is part proof of life. It is part to rally the Ukrainian people. He has been doing, and you talk to people here, they will say he's been doing a tremendous job of it. So he is not likely to go to those talks. What we have heard in the past few hours is that he is willing to send a, quote, delegation. We don't know who would be part of that delegation. And the location, having been moved from Minsk in Belarus to the river crossing which borders the Ukraine and Belarus. For a little bit more on how the Ukrainian government is starting to think about this, we heard from the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States on one of the morning shows this morning. Take a listen.
And they are demotivated. I mean, you spoke earlier today about them surrendering, and our Ministry of Internal Affairs put out publicly information about those who are in captivity now, and we treat them well, unlike how Russians treat our citizens and civilians, killing children. We've lost already so many children. Just recently, a whole family was shot in the car. But and also people who they lost, more than 4,000 Russians will never go back home because they were sent to kill us.
So the Ukrainian government is walking this fine line where they want to be open to the idea of talks. At the same time, the Ukrainian government being very clear. We're hearing from Zelensky say that this and the power of Ukraine is the people that are willing to fight for this. They're willing to fight for their land. They're willing to fight for democracy in defense of their homes. So an interesting line to walk when you talk about potentially negotiating with somebody as they are invading your capital city. Alex?
Yeah, spot on with that comment. Okay. Thank you so much, Cal Perry, for that. Well, back here in the U.S., President Biden is gearing up to give his first State of the Union address in just 2 days amid the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the growing tensions with Russia. Joining me now, Robert Gibbs, former White House press secretary and MSNBC.
That they had record that a number of Russian troops had surrendered. Do you believe lack of resources is among the reasons why?
I think it's a combination of a couple of things. First of all, a lack of a will to fight. There have been many Russian prisoners who have told their captors they did not know what they were going in to do. Were told it was a training mission. The other piece is you just showed the T-80 uniform tank on the screen, which is Russia's most advanced tank. That has a turbine engine. It carries about 230 gallons of gasoline, but it only gets gallons of fuel, but it only gets about 200 miles to that gallon. So you're talking about 1 gallon per mile, about. When you run out of fuel and you don't refuel those tanks, they stop being a moving maneuver force and they start being a pillbox, and they can't take the attacks of the infantry within the cities.
So that also means an absence of fuel trucks then for those armored vehicles. So let's talk about Kyiv now. We have this video in showing destruction of Russian armored personnel carriers by Ukrainian troops, and now a senior U.S. defense official says Russians are facing some logistical challenges. You spelled out what some of them are, lack of fuel. What might some of the other challenges be?
Well, the other challenge is when you're talking about using anti-tank missiles, which are all ground-mounted, you're in a terrain that's unlike the desert. The United States has been fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq where there's not a lot of trees, not a lot of buildings in these kind of places. But when you have mobile armored forces going down streets where there's buildings and trees, you can hide those infantrymen with the anti-tank weapons within those locations. And what happens is and most of these vehicles you'll see have been attacked from the rear. Truthfully, Fred, I'll confess this as a tanker. Sometimes tankers don't look behind them. So when you have infantry sneaking up behind with anti-tank weapons, picking off tanks and personnel carriers, BMPs as they're called, in the city streets is relatively easy to do. So I think the Ukrainian forces are doing an extremely good job of combat in the cities. Now, that's going to point to a bad thing. What's going to happen next? I think, unfortunately, we're going to see additional war crimes committed by Mr. Putin's forces, a lot of artillery, perhaps aerial advances, but Ukrainian forces have also done very good in their air defense. So, again, it goes back to the point is Mr. Putin did not know what he was getting into with this, and his generals, in my view, were incompetent in terms of the way they planned this operation.
All right, Lieutenant General Mark Herling, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, and our breaking news coverage continues straight ahead. Take a look at these very large pro-Ukraine demonstrations taking place globally. This one is in Poland. It's just one of the many demonstrations taking place. We'll have more coverage right after this.
2 loads of snot.
A number of teams across this country, and I want to bring in next Lucas Tomlinson, my colleague, who is also in Lviv. He's been out reporting on the various stories. Lucas, hi.
Well, Ben, a week ago in this college town, kids were having a good time. They were studying, they were going out, they were going to restaurants, having fun. Now they're making bombs. Just a short time before joining you on air, Ben, I was walking around this city. I saw a group of college-age kids making not just Molotov cocktails, but large, looked like roadside bombs to deploy against Russian forces. So as you said, we're far away necessarily from the front lines, although there were some attacks. The closest airstrikes to this city were about 12 miles away. And just yesterday, the mayor of this town said that a Russian air assault at an airfield an hour away was repelled. Some 60 Russian soldiers involved. Not sure how many were killed, but a number of them were fleeing to the woods. It's because of the encroaching potential combat here in this city that many people are leaving. And of course, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are passing through here, scrambling to get west to the safe zone to the Polish border. So we went to the train station as well, Ben, and we found out that all the trains are sold out for this week. In the past 24 hours, 120 Americans have left Ukraine, according to U.S. officials, a sign of the desperation many are feeling right now since the Russian invasion. And while it's notable the Russian tricolor flag has not been raised over any major city in this country, the students we're speaking to are very nervous. They feel like it's only a matter of time. And so for Russian forces, even though they haven't captured the city, they're trying. 2,000 Russian Marines now ashore near Mariupol in southeast Ukraine and moving in on the city. Ukrainians are putting up a tough fight, no question, slowing the Russian advance. In fact, the U.S. officials say the Russians aren't nearly as far along on day 4 of this operation as they would have liked. Now, the Russians, of course, are sending reinforcements. I mentioned 2,000 Russian Marines are ashore marching on Mariupol. You also have hardened Chechen fighters. Ukrainian forces earlier expelled Russian special forces from Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, to the northeast. Now, it's growing concerns like that about these Russian units that are sending so many fleeing, and not just on the trains, but on the roadways as well. As you just saw, Ben, yesterday when you were heading in here, all Ukrainian women and children can flee, but military-age males, 18 to 60, are forbidden from leaving the country because of President Zelensky's decree and mobilization for war. Now, Ukrainian leaders are feeling emboldened today after a speech by Germany's chancellor promising to boost defense spending, something many in the U.S. have wanted for years, and more importantly for right now in this war, pledging to deliver 1,000 Javelin anti-tank missiles. These are fire-and-forget systems. Unlike the TOW missiles, we have to drive them in there. They're wire-guided. These you can fire and run because, of course, the Russians will be shooting back, and we've seen devastating effects on the battlefield. Dozens of Russian tanks destroyed, according to Ukrainian officials, who say, by the way, over 4,000 Russian soldiers are killed. Now, many in the West think that total might be very high, but it just shows the devastation, resistance that Russians are feeling trying to invade this country and people who want to be free. These weapons have been used to slow the Russian advance, including 500 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles that the Germans are also pledging. But a number of them in this country are shooting down Russian gunships. 67 Russian gunships have been shot down on other air assaults. It's very clear, Ben, that the Russians are trying to gain a foothold in air bases throughout the country, not just the one outside the capital, and in fact one southeast of here as well. Now, in a message to NATO, Vladimir Putin said today he's putting his nuclear forces on alert, as we just heard from Peter Doocy. Now, it's likely that U.S. forces will respond in kind as well, Ben. So far, no confirmation from the Pentagon, but you can imagine any deployed ballistic missile submarines are going to be responding. They're not just going to be sitting there and carrying on business as usual. Their alert posture will be raised. You could quite possibly have American pilots, bomber pilots, also on more of an alert status and being called in. Now, this dramatic increase in tension, day 4 of the ground war. Now, it's another reason, people are just so nervous here, Ben. As you know, walking around this city, people are scared, people are nervous, and just quite a change, of course, from just a weekend ago. I mean, it's Sunday evening here, Ben. These kids here in this town are used to, carrying on. This is the, social capital, really, of this country, and they were not prepared for a ground war, and that's what many are doing right now, preparing for one.
Yeah, and everywhere you turn here, there is another story, either uplifting or terrifying. Lucas Tomlinson there, my colleague, with me here in Lviv. Lucas, thanks very much. Dana?
Fascinating, and thank you, Lucas, for being there. Well, a U.S. defense official says Vladimir Putin is frustrated at how slowly his invasion of Ukraine is going, and that Moscow was not expecting to face this much resistance. Jennifer Griffin lived in Moscow in the late 1990s and saw Russian forces firsthand in Kosovo. So when you think about those reports that Putin is frustrated, does that ring true to what your experience would say?
Well, it's interesting, Dana. Intelligence analysts who I've spoken to think that Putin is attempting to escalate to de-escalate. That's why he's threatening to use nuclear weapons. In response to Putin's threat to put his nuclear forces on high alert, a senior U.S. defense official tells me, "We believe this is an unnecessary step, an escalatory one, and could make things much, much more dangerous. We have no reason to believe," this official said, "or doubt the validity of this order, but how it's manifested itself is not completely clear yet," adding, "We are confident we have the ability to defend the homeland, allies, and partners." Now, the statement by the president of Belarus, a country that Putin has essentially annexed without firing a shot, President Alexander Lukashenko, who is now essentially Putin's de facto vice president, issues the following threat and suggests he may allow Russia to place its nuclear weapons back in Belarus. He references the new sanctions announced by the White House and Europe. Quote, "It's worse than war. Russia is being pushed towards a third world war. We should be very reserved and steer clear of it because nuclear war is the end of everything," Lukashenko said in a statement. Russian conventional forces, as you mentioned, and as Lucas mentioned, are facing stiff resistance, like these Ukrainians using their bodies to block a Russian tank. Russian forces have not taken any major cities yet after 4 days of fighting, or achieved air superiority, we're told. They remain 30 kilometers outside the capital. No change in the past, or progress in the past 24 hours. They have faced fuel shortages that we've been reporting on, supply and logistics issues. Of particular concern, the town of Chernihiv, northeast of Kyiv, due east of Chernobyl, where it looks like Russian forces are preparing for a siege that would lead to many civilian deaths, we're told. U.S. officials have described the Ukrainian resistance as remarkably brave and heroic, as evidenced by these students singing the Ukrainian national anthem in the underground subway, now serving as a bomb shelter. The U.S. assesses Putin has committed about 2/3 of the Russian combat power arrayed against Ukraine into the country. The Zelensky government, we're told, is still governing, still viable. He says he has little belief, President Zelensky does, that the talks with the Belarus delegation on the border tomorrow will bear any fruit. Dana?
Jennifer, while we have you, could you just take us back to what it was like and how dangerous it was to report from Moscow at the time you were there?
Well, it was very interesting because it was the end of the Soviet Union and it was the Yeltsin period, and things were starting to normalize relations with the West. But what I remember at that time I remember some of our sources being killed after we would go and speak with them. There was a journalist in particular that I went to meet with down in Kalmykia who was an opposition leader, an activist journalist who was opposing the strongman rule of Kalmykia, a Putin ally, a Yeltsin ally. And she, after our interview with her, the FSB, the secret police came and they dragged her out of her house and they killed her in front of her children. And so it was a brutal place when I lived there. I never thought I would see Vladimir Putin and Russian forces moving in and taking over another country. But we certainly have seen over the last 20 years and documented the kind of poisonings and the assassinations of all of his opposition and his consolidation of power. In fact, today is the 7th anniversary of the assassination of Boris Nemtsov, his main opposition leader, just outside the Kremlin.
It's fascinating, and we thank you for all of your expertise and your hard work. I know you haven't had much of a break, and we appreciate it. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Ben.
Russians control the airspace over Ukraine. How much does that complicate things? Because just a scenario, and again, it's coming from me, not anyone with any sort of military background, but you put heavy equipment over into the border, couldn't it be taken out by Russian aircraft?
It is a risk, and you're on the right point, Alex, which is to say logistics eats strategy's lunch, meaning you can have all the grandiose strategic plans in the world, but if you can't execute them logistically, that brilliant strategy doesn't matter. Here we have one advantage. Poland is obviously a NATO country, a powerful country. We, the United States, have deployed an additional thousands of troops to that border. So it represents a gateway, a door through which we can move these supplies. Right across that border in Ukraine is the town of Lviv. That's a long way from the Russian offensive forces. I think that'll serve as a very functional conduit. And at the moment, it'll be challenging because of lack of air control, but still possible to move supplies across Ukraine and get it to the fight, get it to the front. We're seeing that happen right now.
Okay, former NATO Supreme Allies.
Vehicles have been filmed entering the city, and in the last few hours, multiple explosions have been reported. Exact figures are unknown, but there are reports of large numbers of Ukrainian casualties, both military and civilian, since the invasion began, and of Russian military deaths. Streams of people in cars and on foot have been crossing from Ukraine into Poland, Romania and Hungary. The UN Refugee Agency believes up to 5 million people may try to flee abroad. There's fierce fighting in many parts of the country, with Russian troops advancing from the north, from the east and from Crimea in the south. But tonight, all eyes are on Kiev. There have been exchanges of fire in the north of the city, which was reached by an advance party of Russian troops. Ukrainian authorities say 18,000 machine guns have been handed out to volunteers who want to defend their capital, while Russia claims it's taken control of the Hostomel airfield to the northwest of the city, important for international cargo and a key military airbase. In our first report tonight, our correspondent Nick Beake looks at the day the nation's capital came under attack.
The early sirens wailed in Ukraine's capital once more. But this was no rude awakening. No one had been able to sleep. The latest Russian bombardments had hit yet more homes. Injuring the very civilians the Kremlin promised had nothing to fear from what it calls a targeted attack on the Ukrainian military. As we make our way through Kyiv, we find volunteers now bearing arms to protect their country. We soon see signs of a battle drawing ever nearer, as well as those bracing themselves for a last stand. Of all the places to get a flat tire, Alina's family now caught between Ukrainian artillery and the Russian front line. Elena says the whole family is very afraid and can't now go back to their home. And this is why. What do you think of what Vladimir Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people?
Що ви думаєте, що Путін робить?
This is him, Elena's mother tells me. You can hear the artillery. That is outgoing fire from Ukrainian forces. That family has just left. The fear here is that very soon Russian forces will be making their way down here to take the capital. At the same time, Ukraine's president was trying to reassure a nation, pleading with the world to help them.
For the second day, our cities experienced rocket and bomb strikes. Masses of tanks as well as airstrikes, which are similar to those which Europe has already seen during the Second World War, and about which it said never again. But this is now how it is. It happens again.
President Putin urged the military he was attacking to turn on their own government.
I appeal to the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Do not let neo-Nazis and Ukrainian ultra-nationalists use your children, wives and the elderly as human shields. Take power into your own hands.
Ukraine is under attack on many fronts. In Mariupol, in the southeast, destruction. In Sumy, in the northeast, battles rage. And here in the capital, in circumstances still unclear, horror as a tank drives over a car. Incredibly, the driver survived. And this is a pivotal battleground, an airport northwest of Kyiv. Its fate could be vital to that of the whole country. If the Russians succeed there, this will be one of the first neighborhoods they come through, Podil. Today it looks like any other in Ukraine. This queue is for the pharmacy. Maxim tells us he hopes any advancing Russians would not harm him and his family.
I think they don't take our normal people. I think they have heart inside. They have something good inside.
Elena, a grandmother, says Russian occupation would be a disaster.
This is my city, the city of my parents, my grandparents. I'm not going to leave.
And as for what she makes of Vladimir Putin,
when a person is so inadequate, nobody knows what will come to his mind.
This evening, the mind of President Zelensky was defiant. Speaking from the streets of Kyiv, he posted this message on social media.
We are all here. Our soldiers are here, the citizens are here, and we are here. We defend our independence. That's how it'll go. Glory to our defenders, both male and female. Glory to Ukraine.
Tonight, there is overwhelming support for the men and women being asked to save their country. But there's also a deep fear the effort will not be enough. Nick Beak, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, we had been hoping to broadcast tonight's programme from the capital, but it is too dangerous to be out on the streets. Let's talk to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. And Lise, as we can see, you, the team, others, having to take shelter tonight in a basement.
This is Kyiv tonight, what was a vibrant European city, nearly 3 million people. But tonight they've gone underground to take shelter, and that includes us. We're in an underground parking garage. Many others are here. We could just show you where we are. The chairs all lined up. Cots have been brought out. You can see the urns of coffee and tea in the distance. This is where we're going to have to take shelter through the night, and we're not sure for how much longer. There were repeated air raid sirens tonight, and then a call from the authorities, including the people running this hotel: take to your shelters and don't come out. The mayor of this city, a famous boxer who has now taken on a military uniform and picked up a gun, he told the citizens of Kyiv this is going to be a difficult night. There was a roar of explosions reverberating across Kyiv tonight. Explosions in the distance, still not in the center, still about 10 miles away. There was also the rattle of gunfire and artillery as well. This was a night so different from last night where these explosions first started. But there's a real worry that as the Russian forces keep approaching the city, while there's fighting in the suburbs, this is just the beginning of what could be a long battle, a battle for this city to survive. And we saw today as we went around the city how war has pulled life from Kyiv. People have taken either to underground shelters like this, or they fled, or they're picking up a gun to fight.
Lise, very many thanks. Do take care. Thank you very much. Lise Doucette there in the capital tonight.
When it comes to looks, I feel like a lot of times it starts with your hair. People want thicker hair, they want shinier, healthy looking hair. I'm literally obsessed with Vegamore, okay? True story.
Zelensky was known to Ukrainians then as a comedian, playing the role of a schoolteacher in the series Servant of the People. On that show, Zelensky's character unexpectedly became president of Ukraine after ranting about corruption. Then life imitated art, positioning himself as a political outsider, running on a platform of fighting corruption and ending the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Zelensky won a landslide victory over incumbent Petro Poroshenko in 2019.
His background, he's Jewish, and he was very comfortable in what's called the Russia world. That he made a great career for himself as a comedian and a businessman, in part by appealing not just to Ukrainians, but also to Russians.
Just a few months into his presidency, Zelensky became enmeshed in the scandal that led to then-President Donald Trump's first impeachment trial. A phone call in which Trump leaned on Zelensky to investigate allegations of corruption against Joe Biden's family in Ukraine. Allegations that were never supported by any evidence. Zelensky made no promises on the call and later denied Trump pressured him.
He handled it well because he understood that what he's being asked was outrageous.
But this crisis makes the Trump phone call seem almost trivial. This was the 44-year-old president's message to his country on Thursday.
The enemy has marked me as target number 1, my family as target number 2. They want to destroy Ukraine politically by destroying the head of state.
According to Axios, Zelensky told EU leaders in a video conference Thursday, quote, "This might be the last time you see me alive." How enormous is the pressure he's under right now?
It's really tremendous. I mean, he, to a certain extent, is alone, and it's clear that the Russians have put a target on his head, so I certainly don't envy the position he's in.
By Friday night, Zelensky's warning to his nation was dire.
This night will be very difficult, and the enemy will use all available forces to break the resistance of Ukrainians.
Is he in over his head overall?
You need a real, like, Churchill-type leader to excel at a moment like this. I think he is scrambling and trying to find the right tenor and the right message.
Even top Russian officials won't flat-out deny that Volodymyr Zelensky is in danger. When asked by CNN, do you intend to decapitate the Ukrainian leadership, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov didn't say no, saying only, quote, "Nobody is going to attack the people of Ukraine." Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
And stay with us. In the next hour, we'll return to our breaking news. Ukraine and Russia set to hold talks tomorrow. This as we have new video from Ukraine showing Russian tanks in the streets as the fighting rages on. We'll talk with former U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Richard Burt, when we return.
We see them.
Okay, mother and child in vehicle. Mother is unable to exit the vehicle. Injuries are unknown.
Thank you, OnStar.
My son, is he okay?
Your son's fine.
If you want to capture the crunch and flavor of
Vladimir Putin held nuclear drills for all the world to see. This Sunday, he put them on high alert.
Dear colleagues, you can see that Western countries are not only taking unfriendly economic actions against our country, I mean the illegal sanctions that everyone knows about, but also the top officials of leading NATO countries are allowing themselves to make aggressive statements with regards to our country. That's why I'm ordering the Defence Minister and the Chief of General Staff to put deterrence forces on high combat alert.
Even his defence minister looks concerned. He's put his nuclear forces on high alert. What does that mean, and how worried should we be?
Alerting could mean an increase in general force readiness. It could mean forces from Russia's 12th Duma, which are in charge of Russia's nuclear arsenal, pulling nuclear warheads out of central storage. bring them to places where means of delivery are stored, things like strategic bombers, part of Russia's long-range aviation. It could mean a higher alert level of Russia's strategic bomber force. It could mean more strategic ballistic missile submarines being put out to sea, right? Or it could be a larger number of strategic bomber patrols or things of sort of over-signaling of that nature.
Russian troops have pushed into Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. But their advance does not appear to be the slam-dunk straight-to-Kiev invasion that they'd hoped for. But they have deployed just a fraction of the military power they have on standby, so that could all change. Sky News has confirmed the presence of thermobaric rockets in southern Ukraine, an especially nasty weapon that the Russians are known to have, which sucks in oxygen to create a massive blast. Videos like this of a Ukrainian soldier swearing he'll never speak Russian again once this war is done, testament to the fact that Ukraine's military will not go down without a fight. Ukraine agreed today to send a delegation for talks with the Russians at a site near Chernobyl on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, but they remained defiant.
If the order of President Putin to put on high alert his nuclear weapons is a direct threat to use these nuclear weapons against Ukraine, then I have a very simple message. It will be a catastrophe for the world, but it will not break us down.
In Russia, protesters again took to the streets across the country. Those who see through the propaganda and know this war is wrong, and who aren't deterred by the inevitable arrests. Nuclear forces on high alert, Ukraine's cities under attack, and this kind of a crackdown back home. It is a hard sell even to his own people that this is all in the name of Russia's defense. They don't know why their president is doing this, and the West doesn't either, which makes planning a response to what is now a nuclear threat that much harder. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
My name's Kyle Stumpenhorn.
The escalating crisis in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is putting his country's nuclear and other deterrent forces on high alert as Russian forces continue to move across Ukraine.
Top officials in leading NATO countries have allowed themselves to make aggressive comments about our country. Therefore, I hereby order the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff to place the Russian Army Deterrence Force on combat alert.
A senior White House official telling CNN it is being seen as another escalatory and totally unnecessary step. Even as fighting rages, Ukraine confirmed today that delegations from both Ukraine and Russia will meet for talks tomorrow on the border between Ukraine and Belarus. Ukrainian President Zelensky saying today he doesn't expect much from the meeting, and Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. telling CNN what won't happen at those talks.
But again, we are ready for peace talks, but we are not ready to surrender, and we will defend our country, and we will win.
Forces on alert, with European countries
the talks come as
wagons to isolate Putin and Russia, pitching in to arm Ukraine, imposing economic sanctions and banning Russia from flying aircraft over their collective airspace, making it now more difficult for Russia to launch air attacks or to fly supplies into the conflict zone. Also new this hour, the group that sets the doomsday clock says it will meet this week to evaluate Putin's comments. That doomsday clock was set at 100 seconds to midnight in January when the Russian invasion was a mere threat. Now the group is concerned about unintended escalations, Putin's actions and comments raising new questions about his ambitions.
I don't think he's a rational actor because he's fearful, right? What he wants to do more than anything is restore Russia to national greatness. He's driven by that. He's also driven by a desire to remain in power till at least 2036. And so I think now he knows that all of that is at risk, right? That the Russian military doesn't look very good right now. He doesn't look very powerful. And this is going to
start to roll through Kyiv. They'll be slowed down and give the civilians and troops a chance to fight back.
Well, listen, you guys stay safe. We'll check in a little bit later. Trey, thank you.
We'll go to Lviv, Ukraine right now, where residents are preparing for war. Lucas Tomlinson is live on the ground there with the latest. Lucas. Lucas, can you hear me? Lucas Tomlinson in Lviv.
Brett, a week ago, college kids in this university town were having fun. They were out. They didn't think the Russians were coming. Today, they're making bombs. We saw these college kids earlier today while walking the streets.
The best way to understand the threat that President Putin has again made today with Russia's nuclear deterrent.
In the Russian part, we saw a lot of rocket artillery fire going out from Russian positions. We also saw a lot of military hardware moving in. We did also see a couple of Russian vehicles, quite a few actually, that seemed to be in need of towing, that seemed to be broken down. Now, it's unclear whether or not that's sort of the kind of normal attrition that you have in an operation like this, because obviously you have tracked vehicles that are going on asphalt roads, which might be something difficult for them. Also some older trucks as well. But certainly it was something that was quite noticeable. And the other thing, of course, that is certainly a big statement that the Russians made today is what you alluded to already, Frederica, is the fact that for the first time the Russians have now acknowledged casualties. And it's really been something of a secret here in Russia over the past couple of days, as the Ukrainians kept claiming that there were heavy Russian casualties that they've inflicted on the Russian army, whereas the Russian army really hadn't said anything about that at all. Well, it was only a couple of hours ago that Major General Igor Konashenkov, who's actually someone who I've spent a lot of time with in Syria and in other places as well, he actually put out a video statement acknowledging just that there had been Russian casualties. Let's just listen into some of what he had to say.
Russian servicemen are displaying courage and heroism in fulfilling combat tasks in the special military operation. Unfortunately, there have been deaths and injuries among our comrades, but our losses are considerably lower than the number of nationalists we destroyed, lower than the losses among the Ukrainian armed forces.
So there he is saying that the Russian losses lower than the Ukrainian losses, but really not putting any numbers on it, as you've said as well, Frederica. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we do have to point out, and I think it's important for our viewers to hear, is that from what we're seeing on the Russian side, certainly the Russian army does seem to still have the capacity to drastically escalate the offensive that they're running currently in Kharkiv. There is still a lot of military equipment that is parked on the Russian side, obviously ready to go at any time. So they certainly do have the capabilities to still do that. And one of the other interesting things that we also did see of trucks coming out of the zone, that fighting zone in Kharkiv, is that a lot of the soldiers who were driving those trucks, they hung their flak vests into the windows. So the bulletproof vests they usually wear on their bodies, that could be an indication that they might have either been taking sniper fire or at least were afraid of taking sniper fire, which once again indicates that the battle for Kharkiv seems to be pretty tough, Frederica.
Oh, fascinating. All right. Thank you so much, Fred. All right, Nick, to you in Moscow. So what is to be made of Putin's latest threat of this nuclear deterrence force being at the ready?
Yeah, it certainly ups the stakes. It certainly puts pressure on the Ukrainian authorities. It seems to be a continuation of what Russia has been doing up until now to try to get what it wants, threaten a war in Ukraine, then open a war in Ukraine. And what we've seen from Vladimir Putin so far is that he seems to not know the bounds of how far he's going to go. And we're learning them. There was initially when he built that force around Ukraine, there was the expectation that he wouldn't use it. Then it became clear that he did. He said that he would stay away from civilian neighborhoods. He didn't. And now raising this threat, he's blaming it again. The same place that has put all the blame for his need to invade Ukraine is on NATO. He's blaming NATO and the language that's being used there, that is detrimental to the security, and therefore he's putting his deterrence force, which includes nuclear weapons, on this strategic alert, on this state of higher alert, if you will. I think beyond that, it's very hard to read because it's not clear how far President Putin intends to go. And this is an indication that he's certainly, again, willing to raise the rhetoric and raise the stakes in this environment. But what is his end game in this? Is it simply a tactic of pressure, or is this signaling something yet to come? At the moment, it seems to be being read that this is him sort of upping the image of pressure rather than meaning that he'll carry it out, but is now facing huge sanctions. He's facing sanctions that he didn't expect. They're going to be tougher than he expected. They're going to undermine everything that he's built within the country financially, that sort of war chest, the $600+ billion that he was going to use to head off the possibility of sanctions. This is going further. The reaction to him is going further. His forces are going slower. So this also represents a degree of frustration and potentially a degree of anger. But reading more into it than that at the moment, Fred, is just very difficult because it's very hard to know what President Putin's end point on this aggression is.
And then, Nick, what is the latest with these protests? I mean, thousands of Russians have been
side of those
arrested
negotiations
for speaking out against the Kremlin,
and that
saying
is
no
not
to
going to
war.
change anytime soon.
I mean, the disconnect between talking about him possibly using chemical weapons or mobilizing a nuclear force and then sitting down at a table to get an Iran nuclear deal through is pretty stark.
NATO and the NATO countries, but we should keep in mind that the European Union is also that border with Poland, and that is why the European Union is very much interested in any cessation of violence, as you have hundreds of thousands of refugees who have already left Ukraine. We know that millions of folks, according to the EU, have already been displaced. And so there is a growing concern that this is going to be a humanitarian catastrophe. And when you look at what is happening on the other side of the country from where I am, the east, we know there is fierce fighting. We know there's been fierce fighting in Kharkiv for at least 24 hours. And we're just hearing now from the mayor of Kyiv. And I know that I told you earlier, the mayor of Kyiv saying this morning the city is still under Ukrainian control. There are no Russian forces in the city. Still true, but he has just said that now the city is encircled. They're not going to be able to get anyone out, any more civilians out. And they're certainly concerned that that could turn into a siege, Alex.
Yeah, that is not news that we wanted to hear, nor was the news, Cal, that prevented you from being on the broadcast with us 1 hour ago right now. You were hearing air raid sirens. You had to go down to a bomb shelter to seek shelter. Have you heard anything since then?
No, it's been quiet since then, and these were the first sirens in about 16 hours. And again, we're 350 miles from the capital, so it wasn't clear what the threat is. I will tell you, there's been a growing concern about what they call, quote, insider attacks here in Ukraine. There have been rumors running rampant. Part of this is a disinformation campaign, I think on behalf of the Russians, that Russian troops are putting on Ukrainian army uniforms. That has people here really spooked. It has the police checking the army for their IDs to make sure they say who they say they are. It's why there's a curfew in place here, and also why there's a curfew in place in Kyiv.
Yeah, that's a very frightening development, no doubt. Okay, Cal Perry, thank you so much for that. Stay safe, my friend. Well, joining me right now is Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, a Democratic member of the House Armed Services and Natural Resources Committee. He is also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. Welcome to you, Congressman. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
What he says he plans to do. The president of Belarus, Putin's vassal, said the new sanctions from the U.S. and the EU.
And then Ukraine and Russia holding these talks with no preconditions. So as we see these reports that Russia is frustrated by its lack of progress in Ukraine, could these developments be a result of that? And also your instant reaction to hearing what Cal Perry just reported, this from the mayor of Kyiv, that apparently the city is encircled. How does that complicate things for the residents of Kyiv?
Well, certainly for the residents of Kyiv, it's going to be a couple really rough days. And I think if you think about it, yes, they've had a rough days, but right now where the Russian army is, they're going to have to either understand that they're going to have to go house by house in Kiev and Kyiv and potentially lose a lot of men, or they're going to start doing some really hard shelling in the hopes of, destroying the resistance. Either way, I don't think that's going to work. And I think that it's going to come to the Russian realizations pretty quickly after that. Now, to the other area about the talks, I'm actually, I believe those so-called peace talks, whatever you want to call them, are actually designed maybe to calm the markets. Right now, the Russian ruble has dropped almost in half. Right now, it takes about 171 rubles, I think it was, to equal a dollar. It used to be 81 rubles yesterday. So I think this might be an effort by Putin to maybe calm the markets, but it's not going to work. As for the nuclear deterrence thing, I mean, obviously we should always be worried, but they're always at the ready. So, by the way, is our nuclear capability, our triad system. We're always at the ready. So I wouldn't take that as something that we should be afraid of. I think it's more of something that Putin's throwing out there because he's just getting desperate at this point, and he knows he's losing the public opinion across the world, but also in his own country. And so these are efforts, I think, to try to figure out some breathing room for him, at least to look like he's still a leader of his country. But right now, I think the person that's most in danger actually is Putin in terms of not being able to finish his presidency.
Yeah, looking at the brutality of the Russian playbook right now, President Zelensky said that last night was brutal, saying Russia attacks everything, including ambulances. The Ukrainian resistance, yes, still fighting back. It is protecting the capital, Kyiv. But what do you make of Russia's advance? Are you surprised at the fight that Ukraine has effectively put up? When you look at how outmanned they are, literally troops on the ground, citizens fighting troops. When you look at the amount of military armor that Ukraine possesses versus that of Russia, it is remarkable what they've been able to accomplish. But are you surprised by it?
No, I mean, I went and visited Ukraine in December, and I spoke to the Ukraine Special Forces, Ukraine government, and I knew then that if given the opportunity, given the weapons, that they would be able to defend themselves. And always defensive countries that are defending themselves, they know their territory, they have the moral and spirit to actually keep fighting, especially in a country that has been at war, by the way, for almost 10 years now with Russia. So you have a lot of veterans that are ready to go too. So my biggest thing when I got back in December was that we needed to make sure that they were supplied.
Had to go through
Here's what I don't think Russia quite understands.
Isn't
if they're giving you
still radioactive?
This much resistance now, and then now you're going to lay siege to these cities, and you're going to kill more of them, how are you actually going to effectively occupy a country of 44 million? Are you going to keep 200, 300,000 troops there for the next year to 2 years? Because at some point, it's not sustainable. And at some point, the people will rise again and throw off whatever puppet government you install. So until the Russian, I'd say oligarchs or leadership start coming to an understanding how this ends, this is not going to go well for Russia, because at the end of the day, they will never be able to hold Ukraine. They may capture it, but they will not be able to hold it.
Do you agree with sending more U.S. troops to Central Europe to protect the NATO countries? And is there a scenario in your mind that plays out which triggers sending Americans to fight?
Yeah, they attack NATO.
I think right now we do need to send our troops to our NATO countries. Clearly Putin is getting desperate. I don't believe he's a rational actor anymore, which is very scary, and he may try to trigger a larger war. And we want to make sure that we reinforce our allies, and so they feel safer. What are the conditions under which we would send troops into Ukraine? I can't really say that right now. I think certainly there could be an argument made if there's massive amounts of civilian deaths where there's just, the randomly leveling of cities. I think there could be some humanitarian argument made. But at this point, the most important thing we could do and the most effective fighters are the Ukrainians themselves. And we just need to make sure that we're feeding them the information and feeding them the ammo. Give them the intel about where to shoot, and then give them the capability to shoot at it. And that will basically, I think, end up winning the day.
Yeah. President Biden has said that NATO is more united than ever. Now we have both Finland and Sweden. They're brushing off Russia's threat on joining NATO. How critical is this entire unification to stop Putin? I mean, you were in Munich for last weekend's security conference. Is the world effectively isolating Russia and Putin?
I don't think I've seen this level of unity across the world against one person, maybe since Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq. I'm sorry, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the 1990s. The fact that we're cutting them off from our transactional system, SWIFT, not ours, but the world system. People are stopping their planes from coming across borders. This is something that I think has never really been seen. And the fact that Finland and Sweden, who really have always tried to stay close to NATO, but not so much so that they end up joining and pissing off Russia. Now they know that, there is some benefit to being NATO. Just being close enough is not going to do it. And, I think really Putin created his own worst nightmare.
Well,
and has
Ireland
created a self-fulfilling prophecy here. And I do a lot of work with the Finnish government, and they're very capable fighters. And that's going to be a sting should they join NATO. And it will really affect Russia. They will actually psychologically affect Russia.
Okay. Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights today. Coming up next, what you give up when you're forced to leave your country in the middle of an invasion.
Yes, thank you, Brett.
How do you see it right now as we are day by day watching the Ukrainians push back against Russian forces?
Well, this is heartbreaking, Brett. And as I've explained to many viewers before, I spent some time in Ukraine while it was part of the Soviet Union in 1989. And what I learned from the Ukrainians at that point was that they wanted to be free. That remains true today. Ukrainians want to be free. And what we see, this aggression shown by Russia, by Vladimir Putin, it is absolutely unacceptable. And it should be unacceptable across the world stage. We have to do more to provide lethal aid to the Ukrainians. We need to cut off Russian energy sources. We need to become energy independent, and we need to make sure we are doing absolutely everything we can to allow the Ukrainians freedom and democracy.
Yeah. But
this past week, Donald Trump held what was called the Take Back Congress Candidate Forum down at Mar-a-Lago. He had current members of Congress come down and give little speeches. He had candidates who are running for House and Senate come down and give their little speeches. Of course, meet with some donors. But most importantly, go down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of Donald Trump. Because after all, that's what this really was about. You can call it a forum all you want. This really was an ass-kissing conference. Maybe even contest, I don't know. So here's a list of people who attended Donald Trump's little come and adore me seminar. Those who were already elected officials: Senator Marsha Blackburn, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Lindsey Graham, Representative Jim Banks, Representative Ronnie Jackson, Representative Mike Carey, and Representative Mary Miller. Candidates who showed up include Herschel Walker, Eric Greitens, Morgan Ortagus, Harriet Hagman, and Max Miller. So not a ton of, well-known figures in the prospective candidate list. And, of course, some of the usual suspects in the already in Congress list, right? I mean, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham. My question, though, is where was Matt Gaetz? Right? Where was Marjorie Taylor Greene? Where was Lauren Boebert?
And the other guy,
Madison Cawthorn. Where's all those little diehard Trumpers? Why weren't they invited down to the candidate forum?
And the minority
I'd say that's a pretty big slap in the face, right?
Representative. What's his name?
Maybe they need to go recheck their emails and see if they had missed something, because I would assume that Donald Trump would have brought down some of his most loyal supporters. Well, we do know that Matt Gaetz actually was recently at Mar-a-Lago, but I guess he had to clear out before the important people came down there. But here's the thing. Said it before, I'll say it a million times, especially since we're in an election year. These candidates, these prospective candidates may want to back off a little from the Trump love, right? Studies have already proven that when Donald Trump gives you his endorsement, your chances of winning that election fall below 50%, even if they were above 50% before you received the endorsement. It also means that your candidate, once you get that Trump endorsement, your candidate's fundraising will now outpace yours on average. That's what happens when Trump endorses somebody. That's what happens when Trump inserts himself into races he ought not be inserting himself into. So if these Republican candidates were smart, not only would they not have shown up, they would have told their opponents, like, hey, you should go down to Mar-a-Lago to this thing Trump's doing because maybe he'll give you an endorsement. And then, of course, I reap all the benefits from that. It really is a kiss of death to get an endorsement from Donald Trump. So again, maybe it is time for these people to start encouraging their opponents to go down there and get that endorsement. Because it sure as hell isn't going to help anyone
who receives it.
This is Hattie. Hattie wants to know why you have not
are facing heavy losses. They are having logistical troubles, having trouble getting fuel and other things to the front lines. And there was evidence of this real success that the Ukrainians are having, keeping the Russians at bay. Here around the capital of Kyiv in a place called Bucha, which is just to the west, on the western edge of the city. We have this new video that CNN has geolocated and verified that shows this column of Russian vehicles, including armored personnel carriers that have been torched and destroyed. They are on their side. A person who is in this video, you can hear him saying in Ukrainian, "They came to our land. I wish you all to burn to hell." Now, we do have these talks tomorrow morning, Monday morning, between delegations from Russia and Ukraine. They are taking place on the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, just to the north of where I am. Belarus, of course, has been hosting Russian troops. And so there was some resistance from the Ukrainian side to have those talks there. President Zelensky saying that he would not do them in the Belarusian capital, Minsk. That's why they're taking place on the border. It is not clear who's going to be representing both sides. We know that it's certainly not going to be the presidents. President Zelensky saying that his top officials, including top military leaders and his prime minister, are very much staying in Kyiv during these talks. He also says, President Zelensky, that he's not holding out much hope, but of course he is willing to sit down or have his officials sit down and speak with the Russians. But it is clear, Frederica, that the Ukrainians, at least for these talks tomorrow, are in listening mode. Fred?
All right, Alex Marquardt, thank you so much. Be safe. All right, with us now to discuss the latest in Ukraine is retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton, a CNN military analyst. Colonel, good to see you.
Good to be with you.
So let's begin with how it appears the Ukrainian forces are holding up. Ukrainian officials say that fighting has been breaking out in Kharkiv as Russian troops enter Ukraine's second largest city. We've got video from that location where it shows that Ukrainians are, holding up the city. And you just heard our Alex Marquardt, who said Russians are facing a lot of logistical problems. I mean, how do you see this battle playing out?
Well, it looks like the Russians have gotten into surprising difficulty, as Alex and you have pointed out, Frederica. This is kind of symptomatic of a military that has a lot of ambition, but does not really have the wherewithal to achieve its mission objectives. For President Putin of Russia, that's a fairly dangerous scenario to actually be in, because he gambled a lot on the success of this mission, just from a pure operational aspect, and it looks like there are at least perturbations in this, or at least some difficulties here, and as a result of that, I'm not sure that he's going to be able to achieve all the goals that he set out for himself, and I think the indication of that is the fact that there are going to be talks tomorrow on the Belarus-Ukrainian border.
So what does this say about Russia's military planning, that it would seem to be either caught flat-footed or, executed poorly, whether it be by not using the more efficient, arsenal, or not having their logistics, I'm just asking for your analysis, because certainly I'm not advocating for wishing that they did this better, but it seems like the wheels are literally falling off.
Yeah, well, there's always this adage in the military, every plan falls apart when you make contact with the enemy. And that's kind of what's happened here. And this is really interesting for me, because I've watched the Russian military for many, many, many years, going back to the days of the Soviet Union. And the one thing that was always stressed about the Russian military, or the Soviet military before them, was the fact that they planned so thoroughly. Well, I think part of the problem is that, number one, their planning may not be as good as we think it is. Number two, The fact that they have this planning, it may be so rigid that it cannot morph to the events that are unfolding in front of them. So, with us, the kind of joke is that, kind of a bad joke is that, when we go in, we have a plan, but then we make contact with the enemy and we throw the plan out the window and we improvise. The Russians apparently aren't capable of improvising to the extent that they would need to in order to be successful in this.
Mm-hmm. And then dissect this, if you will. Today the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations said the U.S. will not use U.S. troops to create a no-fly zone in Ukraine. Do you agree with that decision? And then how do you assess it?
Well, creating a no-fly zone, I know several people like Representative Adam Kinzinger have suggested doing something like this. And on the surface, it looks like it might have been a good idea, but there are a lot of logistical problems with setting one of these no-fly zones up. I was, involved in the no-fly zones in Iraq before 2003. And I will say that, the Ukrainian airspace is a bit different, and you would really have to achieve American air superiority, actually air supremacy, before you could do that. So you'd have to bring American forces in, NATO forces in. They would have to overfly the territory. They would have to be willing to have rules of engagement where we would shoot down Russian or other hostile aircraft. And if that were the case, that could really escalate tensions. So I think, right now the feeling, based on what the UN ambassador has said, it is not to do something like this because it probably won't give you the benefits that you think it will. And then you also have to watch out for things like artillery and low-flying helicopters, and no-fly zones certainly wouldn't cover the artillery, and it's questionable whether or not they would cover the helicopters as well.
All right. Colonel Cedric Layton, thanks so much. All right, coming up, we'll talk with Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski of New Jersey, what he has to say about Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's move to push through an emergency aid package for Ukraine. That discussion next.
Been seeing evidence of that ourselves here at MSNBC. We've seen the video, particularly uprisings, protests in both Moscow and St. Petersburg. So I should hope that you take that as a level of comfort, knowing that there are many Russians against what is happening right now to your country. Give me a sense of, certainly you have the emotional support there, but logistically, what are you hearing about the march by Russia on Ukraine and the ability for the Ukrainian military, a citizen military
how
in many
hard
ways,
the current
to
situation is to bear for all of those fellow countrymen in Germany who were born in Russia or born in Ukraine. And we will not allow this conflict between Putin and the free world to tear open old wounds and cause new problems. And there's another thing we mustn't forget. In many Russian cities, plenty of citizens demonstrated against Putin's wars, risking arrest and risking physical harm to themselves. That took a great deal of courage, and we respect this. Germany stands today with Ukraine. Our thoughts and our sympathies lie with the victims of the Russian war of aggression. And we also support everyone in Russia who are countering the powerful regime of Putin and rejecting its war. And we know you are many in Russia. And I say to all of you, do not give up. I am certain that liberty, tolerance, and human rights will prevail in Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, the third major challenge we have is preventing Putin's war infecting other countries in Europe. And that means, without any ifs, ands, and buts, we are completely committed to the Mutual Defense Clause and our collective security guarantee in NATO. And I assured this to those in Eastern Europe who worry about their own security. President Putin must not underestimate our resoluteness. We will defend the NATO territory on the basis of our collective security guarantee, inch for inch. And we mean this absolutely certainty. In taking a country into Ukraine, the will that we have as an alliance is to defend this country as we would defend ourselves.
We heard from the leader of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, who has sent some of his troops very proudly to Ukraine to fight, and he has said that he thinks that Putin and his army need to step up their work, get the job done. And then to Belarus, who has been helping President Putin in his war in Ukraine. He was out and about today. There was a referendum, in fact, in Belarus about extending his rule until 2035. And he took potshots at the Ukrainian President Zelensky, calling him Napoleonchik, Little Napoleon, and suggesting that he looked like he'd been on some drinking binge walking around town in those T-shirts, saying, this is just a bed of roses at this point. In a couple of days, it will all come to bloom, and then there'll be a war, and then there will be a meat grinder. This, Brett, you know, as Zelensky has obviously been up day and night making a show of support with his people, probably not sleeping, and clearly being quite steadfast in his determination to stay amongst his people. But this also important to point out, as Belarus extends a sort of almost olive branch to Zelensky to try to have some more negotiations, which a lot of people assume is just a fig leaf or just an attempt to buy some more time, Brett.
Yeah, there may be negotiations along the Belarusian-Ukrainian border tomorrow, but we'll see where that goes. Amy, very quickly, for people who don't get it about the protests in Moscow and throughout Russia, how significant that is, how much those people are taking really their lives, their livelihood into their hands by protesting and being anti-war there.
Well, I think that is the sentiment among so many people. It's just how do you express it? We've seen it on social media. We've heard calls on social media for all decent people to come out onto the streets because they have a responsibility as Russian citizens to say no to all of this. But yes, the police are out in force. They were out. It's the 7th anniversary of the assassination of opposition figure Boris Nemtsov, and so there were some clashes around his memorial site where people laid flowers. He was very outspoken about the annexation of Crimea and died a year after that. So it's a huge risk, and the fact that we see any people coming out is significant. But the issue is, until it's really a mass of people, it's not likely to change Putin's position on anything as regards to this war, Brett.
Yeah. Amy Kellogg in Moscow. Amy, thanks. Let's take a look at the situation in Ukraine here. Bring it back to this map where we have the areas that Russia is essentially holding, and there are no major cities as of this hour that Russia is holding. You have obviously, Kyiv is the center here, and we just heard from the mayor saying that it's time the evacuations cannot go forward because they're surrounded by all sides, according to the mayor of Kyiv. Here in Kharkiv, there was a major battle that has been going back and forth with the Ukrainians pushing back on Russian forces. They've been funneling in from Russia this way. And then the area of Donbass, there have been advances by the Russians here. There's a big area down here by Crimea. I want to show you up close. And this is Mariupol, this is Kherson, big fights, Russian forces destroying a dam that was built to stop the flow of water to Crimea. There have been a lot of airstrikes in this area. Just here, 10 civilians of Greek origin, we're told, were taken out and killed in that area over the past day. This is Kharkiv, and you see this area right here. This is along the border to the north and east. This has been a major battle for Ukrainian forces that have come in with brigades this way and fighting the Russian forces as they're advancing. They have used cluster warheads that one of them was found embedded in the ground there, and it has been a major battle. The Ukrainian forces, according to U.S. and British intelligence, have done very, very well for themselves, and they're not a big force. Retired four-star General Philip Breedlove joins me now for more on this. General, are you surprised the resistance of the Ukrainians as you look at this breakdown? 209,000 active personnel versus 900,000. You've got just an overwhelmingly David and Goliath operation here, and yet they're having success holding back the Russians.
They are, Brett, and thanks for having me on. They've had some time to prepare, and maybe the world wasn't paying attention. We were paying so much attention to the Russian forces that we were not watching what Ukraine is doing. They prepared a good defense in depth, and they're causing problems for Russia from the moment they cross the borders into their country.
They have these armored columns of tanks like this, the T-90, and a number of them have been taken out with anti-tank weapons, the javelins, the stingers. What about that? Germany is funneling in those weapons. The question is how the Ukrainians get them from the various countries that are now stepping to the plate, providing them.
So we've got many javelins in there ahead of time. We don't have any U.S. Stingers in there. The Stingers are all being provided by other NATO nations. And don't forget that Ukraine's a very advanced country, and they are making their own anti-tank weapons. Today, as things are coming into Ukraine, they're coming through the Polish border primarily, and some are coming from the south. But many NATO nations, as you know now, which is a great sign, are stepping up to help equip the Ukrainians in this battle.
General, as you see this map and you hear the stories of forces coming into Kyiv, or at least around them, about 30 kilometers, we're told, what do you see from a strategic standpoint? And all of these reds are airstrikes or fires reported on the map.
Well, there are several things happening that are worrisome. The attacks in the east, I think, are primarily to fix some of the best Ukrainian forces that are in the east so that those Ukrainian forces can't respond to the north or the south, which appears to be the two most dramatic directions now. And what you also don't have on your map is the Russian naval infantry landing in Odessa. If they take Odessa, that's the last really good remaining port that Russia or that Ukraine has. Now, what we know there is that it's a pretty small force now. They seem to be holding some of the port facilities, but Odessa is a huge town, and I don't think the Russians are ready to try to assault it. But just remember that if they close that port, it really cuts Ukraine off from the sea.
Yeah,
so
this is right here. These Marines, we're told about 2,000, the Russian force landed at kind of a Marine landing there, and that fighting has been intense, General.
That's correct. And so the push on Kyiv is obviously important, and Kharkiv. This is an area that we didn't anticipate quite so much in the beginning, but clearly they're making a hard push there, and the Ukrainians are doing a good job of holding them off, even though they truly are surrounding that city, I believe. Kyiv is a little more being attacked from the north, but there are some forces along the southern edge as well.
Yeah. General Breedlove, we appreciate your time today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
One potential presidential candidate emerging as a clear favorite at this year's CPAC straw poll. We'll tell you who it is and go there live right after the break.
Defiant, determined, strong. Up next, a look at how Ukrainian citizens are so determined they are not going down without a fight.
The events of recent days and weeks have shown us that a responsible energy policy looking to the future isn't just something that's important for our economy and for our environment. It is also decisive for our security. And this is why the faster we can expand renewable energies, the better it is. And we have set the right course as an industrial country. Until 2045, we want to become a zero-carbon industry. And with this aim ahead, there are important decisions that we will have to take. For example, building up a coal and gas reserve. We have decided that the storage long-term options for gas have to be increased to 200 billion cubic meters, and we will have to buy additional natural gas reserves on the market. And we've decided to have 2 LNG reserves and to build them in as soon as we can. The German economics minister Habeck, I want to thank very much for all of his efforts. What was necessary in short term can be connected to what we needed long term anyway to achieve a successful transformation. An LNG terminal where natural gas comes to today can take on green hydrogen tomorrow. And naturally, the high energy prices are things we need to look at. Putin's war has hiked up these prices, and that's why this week we've put together a package to ease this burden. We have we've got a heating support for low earners and for pensioners, and we will be looking at how to ease this burden on
If you want to capture the
citizens.
crunch and flavor of your youth,
Our message is clear.
Blast was heard to the west of the capital
citizens
Kiev this
and the
morning.
companies
An
in
oil
this
depot
country
was
will
also
not be
blown up
left
close to
alone
the
in
city
this
last
difficult
night.
time. Ladies and
Ukrainian
gentlemen,
officials say that Russian troops
the
have entered the country's
change
second
that
largest
Putin
city, Kharkiv, after an explosion at the gas pipeline in the northeastern city. Well, Ukrainian media is reporting that Russian forces occupy Nova Kakhovka to the south of the country. Our correspondent Jonah Fisher has sent this report.
For a fourth night, Russia waged war on its neighbour. This is an oil depot near an airstrip to the south of Kiev. With toxic smoke filling the air, people have been advised to close their windows and stay indoors. The enemy wants to destroy everything, says the local mayor. To the northeast, not far from the Russian border, a gas pipeline was hit, with the authorities warning of an environmental disaster. But this doesn't look like it was the decisive night for Ukraine's capital that some had feared. Yesterday, all Kiev's residents were instructed to stay inside until Monday, with the city's boxer turned mayor warning of Russians in their midst.
Many of the Ukrainians taking up arms to fight Putin's forces never thought they would have to do this. Under siege and outgunned, many people in Ukraine are putting their lives on the line against an overwhelming Russian assault on their country. CNN's Matthew Chance has the story.
These are Ukraine's civilian defenders, local residents taking up arms and ready to fight.
From him.
And that's his blood on the ground.
This is his blood.
Already, here in a suburb of the capital Kiev, there's been blood spilled.
One small bullet. My people was here and covered by this.
And deadly contact between these volunteers and Russian forces.
Oh yeah.
I've never served in the army.
You've never served in the army? Volunteers like Yuri, who was an economic analyst, he tells me, before this Russian invasion made him a fighter.
So you shot a gun in school,
You work in an office, but now you're defending your city.
Correct. I didn't think I would join this unit just 2 days ago. I thought that, I don't know how to handle guns. And yesterday it came to me that, Russians are in the city. I mean, it's close to the point that I have completely changed my mind, and I have decided that, I should do something about it.
Just hours before, this northern Kiev suburb of Obolon was the scene of firefights as Russian forces probe the Ukrainian capital. Now the entire city and its residents are bracing and preparing for more. Oh, there's petrol bombs.
Yes.
There's your Molotov cocktails.
Yes.
Show me. Покажи меня.
This is my javelin. This is what I have to use to stop the tank.
These are your Molotov cocktails, your petrol bombs.
Right. Yes.
And you made these yourself?
No. The people from this building bring me this.
The people from the local...
From this building, they bring me this.
And they may be needed soon. Very soon. As we left the building, more shots ring out as Russia's assault on the city seems at hand. Matthew Chance, CNN, Kiev, Ukraine.
Pretty incredible. Up next, support for Ukraine. People around the world are protesting Russia's invasion. We take you live to New York, where protesters are standing in solidarity with Ukraine.
You hear him say, oh, Russia can take over a whole country, they've sanctioned him. What you don't hear is what he...
To the west, the desperate exodus is continuing, with long queues at border crossings leaving Ukraine and chaos at train stations.
Many of us thought that it's just informational war.
Not let it happen in the first place.
You see what happened, and we don't understand why Putin does it.
We need help from world. We say help, please, because we're here, so we're alone here.
4 days in, Russia's hopes of a quick victory have not materialized, and Kiev has not fallen. But on the southern front, the Russians are gaining ground, and there's plenty of troops, tanks, and equipment still waiting to be deployed. Jonah Fisher, BBC News.
It was an ominous sight, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. Elite Russian soldiers creeping into Kharkiv's northern suburbs. The city is an obvious target. The Russian border's only 20 miles away. But the people who live here do not want an occupying force.
С тяжелого стреляют в сторону домов.
In a series of videos verified by Sky News, we see soldiers who we believe to be Ukrainian. They engage an enemy column with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades. This is intense, close combat. Is everyone okay? Shouts one man. Then we see a column of badly damaged vehicles being searched by Ukrainian troops. They're armored 4x4s with Russian markings, and they have been peppered with bullets. The occupants are nowhere to be seen.
Safe. A pretty intense day today.
We spoke to a local resident who took shelter as the battle raged close by.
People from the different districts of the city, they saw the groups of 3-4 vehicles and some people. We have quite strong defense here in the city, and we have the special troops who can have the battle inside the city. It's a different story than outside.
This city of 1.5 million has experienced 3 days of warfare, and many have had to move underground. The city's children's hospital has done the same. The patients and their parents now trying to cope in the cold in this rudimentary shelter. We're living here now. This is our house, said one mother. Tens of thousands have left Kharkiv, seeking shelter in other communities, like the city of Dnipro to the south. There is food and beds for people like Anatoly, who had to leave his elderly parents behind.
How did you feel when you left the city? Were you feeling scared? Were you feeling frightened?
Чувствовал, что это вообще, и подло, и несправедливо, вызывало гнев, и думал, что может это остановить, когда это закончится.
That's a question they'll ask to the north, in Sumy, where a residential complex was hit by artillery shells. At least 6 people were killed, including a 7-year-old girl. In Kharkiv, the local authorities say they are back in control. The Russian incursion has been repulsed. It seems the nation's second largest city will not submit. John Sparks, Sky News, in eastern Ukraine.
When it comes to looks, I feel like a lot of times it starts with your hair. People want thicker hair, they want shinier.
There are no rules, so to speak, so they're being interpreted in real time. So yes, it would in fact fall under Article 5. Cyber attacks are very hard to control and could spill over, for example, from the Ukraine to Poland. And then we would have another problem there where it would involve the NATO allies to take action against Russia.
Charles Marino, we appreciate your time. We'll be watching this space closely. Thanks.
Thank you.
Breaking news and live reports from the ground in Ukraine. New attacks. Plus, here in the nation's capital, I'll be joined on set by the UK's ambassador to the US about the situation right after the break.
Guys, feeling tired, getting soft, growing old? Wake up and grab Ageless Male Max with a non-prescription ingredient to help boost your total testosterone. Be the man you want to be.
Be the man you want to be.
British company and made in the US of A in Illinois. Stoli vodka is another one that's pretty popular that people will associate with Russia. The word Stoli, right, does, but instead it is made in Latvia, and the company that owns Stoli is based in Luxembourg. And that is a member of NATO. So take a look at the statement that the Stoli Group sent to CNN Business saying, we don't want to be involved in this, saying for decades, Stoli Group has supported the marginalized and those at risk of unwarranted aggression. We stand now with all Ukrainians and Russians calling for peace. That came from a company spokesperson. So there's the symbolism there of pouring out these brands that you think are connected with Russia, but when you dig a little deeper, you'll see that about 1% or less than 1% of all the vodka consumed in the U.S. is actually made in Russia. You want to look for brands, Russian Standard and Green Mark, those are tied to Russia directly, but the symbolism, Fred, is there. That's fascinating. All right, Nadia Romero, thanks so much. And we'll be right back.
Why burn a candle when you can switch to Airwick Essential Mist? It's the modern way to transform fragrance infused with natural essential oils into a mist. Airwick Essential Mist.
Shoot a lady, would ya?
Who is it? It's Amazon, and we're gonna unbox. How's that? We'll unbox, and we'll unbox with the scan. There we go. All right, what we got here? What we got here is the keyboard table. Man. Like broken glass, we damage even in defeat. We are tiny pieces. Like snowflake crystals building on the city street. Fuck is heavy, man. There you go. Do that. Anyway, it's a table. This is instructions for how to put it together. And there's one clamp. Man, that sucker is heavy duty, dude. There's the other clamp. This is made like for industrial use. It's a lot of screws. I guess these are the cushions for the clamp. And this is something else. This is, yeah. I don't know what the hell this is. Like a brace. And I guess this is it, huh? It's in 2 parts. This kind of sucks. It's in 2 parts. Oh, that's the rails. That's what that is. Back to news.
Send quote unquote a delegation. I think it's obvious that the president won't be a part of that delegation, partly because
He is becoming so important to the defense of the city of Kyiv, according to Ukrainian officials. But more than that, he's becoming a real leader in this conflict. The saying, and it's an English saying, cometh the hour, cometh the man, is making the rounds here, because he is every day trying to rally people by reminding them, and his message is clear, the Ukrainian people know what they are fighting for. They are fighting for their freedom. They are fighting for their homeland, and the Russian army does not know what it's fighting for. Now, to the fight itself. In the eastern part of the country, the fighting is fierce, especially in the northeastern city of Kharkiv. We've seen video of Russian troops moving slowly in column formation behind armored personnel carriers, a sign that the urban fighting there is pretty fierce, which is what we are hearing from the government. To the capital of Kyiv, it has been under a third night of heavy bombardment. People there sleeping in bomb shelters. We've seen local media actually moving their anchor desks down to parking lots and bomb shelters because that bombardment has been going now for 3 days entirely. Now, to where I am in the western part of the country, there is this unfolding humanitarian crisis. Here in the city of Lviv, we continue to see an influx of refugees. According to the United Nations, more than 360,000 people have already fled the country. We know that number is a low figure, Andrea. When you talk about the people that have been displaced, you talk about this heavy fighting, it's going to only rise. The border with Poland is just about 50 miles from where I am, and we understand that the wait time is up to 36 hours to cross. Some people leaving their cars behind, leaving their belongings behind, trying to cross on foot. And I will just tell you, it is cold and raining and at times snowing. And as more and more people sort of flee the east to the west, more and more folks are going to be sleeping outside, and those conditions are only going to get worse, Andrea.
And here in Moscow, an escalation from Vladimir Putin today, ordering his nuclear deterrent forces on alert as he faces more punishing sanctions from the West. And I've just seen a security alert from the embassy in Moscow alerting people that flights to and from Russia are now very limited. And this is the closing of the airspace by the European Union. So if you can handle all of that.
Yeah, that's right. Just to that breaking news, as you mentioned, the U.S. Embassy putting out this notice to U.S. citizens here in Russia, and it says U.S. citizens should consider departing Russia immediately via commercial options still available. Basically warning Americans that getting out of here, if you like, it may not be possible. That notice also goes on to recommend that Americans in Russia notify friends and family of your safety, be aware of your surroundings, the kinds of warnings the American embassy has been putting out here. Then to that question of President Putin's warning to the West about his nuclear deterrent. It's not the first time that we have heard him say that. He's saying that he's putting his nuclear deterrent on high alert. We don't precisely know what that means, Andrea, because Russia's nuclear capability is always ready, just as much as the US capability is. It does look, and we talk about the war in Ukraine, there is also a propaganda war. I think it can be read that way as a war of words, but it also just underscores the danger that this conflict could spill out into a conflict between Russia and NATO countries and the US. And of course, the reason why both sides are reluctant to see that happen because of the nuclear capability of both sides. Just some other news, Andrea, to cover. Russia today saying that it has hit more than 1,000 military sites, but more importantly, I think in their statement today, admitting for the first time that Russian soldiers have been killed and wounded, and even that some have been captured. That's the first time that we've heard Russia kind of admit that they are suffering casualties, perhaps suggesting that they are not doing so well. And I think that sheds light on those negotiations that Cal was talking about. A former Russian official with close contacts in the Kremlin speaking to me today described those talks with Russia and Ukraine as really Russia trolling the West and Ukraine. He certainly held out very little hope, and we're seeing this from other Russians with strong contacts to the Kremlin, suggesting they had very little hope that these talks will reach any kind of a resolution, and everybody is bracing themselves, I suppose you could say, for Vladimir Putin. We hope he doesn't to decide to unleash more of an onslaught, because as we have been talking through the weekend, he faces real growing opposition here in Russia. Just one final point before I leave you on that, Andrea. The Interfax news agency saying the prosecutor's office here in Russia is warning anyone in Russia sending money to Ukraine that will be considered treason and threatening them with 20 years in prison.
So first thing is you put the board together.
Which is raising the stakes considerably as well. And just a quick question here. Are you surprised by the number of protests in Russia, by the protests from Russian sports figures and others around the world, and the international reaction against Russia?
Medium screws and short screws.
You know, this is shaking Russian society, Andrea. There are many, as we've said, Russians with close connections in Ukraine, so they know about what is happening, and it leaves them, many, very, very worried about friends and loved ones in Ukraine. I think they are genuinely worried about the economy. Andrew, just to give you an anecdote, we've been asked to pay in advance for our hotel because the hotel is worried that the credit cards won't work anymore. There are stories of people stocking up on food, lines at ATMs for people to get foreign currency. So there is a fear of an iron curtain coming down. And for many Russians, I think that will lead them to question their leadership. And that, of course, frightens Vladimir Putin.
And indeed, as we said also at the top, this U.S. embassy warning that U.S. nationals in Russia should consider leaving immediately. That's the warning from the embassy and consulates. Kelly O'Donnell, I haven't had a chance in the last few minutes, of course, while we're in the air to check with the State Department, but is anyone considering withdrawing U.S. personnel from the embassy?
You have a sharp side and a wrong side.
I also have not had any warning from the White House about that piece as well, but if you look at the rhythm of how things have played out, we have seen how those initial warnings urging Americans to leave a place are often step one, and then trying to make an assessment about what kinds of risks Americans who are working in the various missions, consulates, and embassies around the world might face. So we'll follow on that. Certainly the U.S. position today is looking at what is this new provocation from Vladimir Putin in that video address where he talks about the high alert for his nuclear forces. And basically the response from administration officials has been to call it a manufactured event, to say that ratcheting up the rhetoric is another way for Putin to try to create an event to allow for him to become more aggressive. And at the same time, it is a great concern because you've got, for example, the NATO Secretary General reminding everyone that miscalculation in times of war can be a cause of great danger. And so while they don't see any immediate threat to the NATO alliance, if there were any spillover, that, of course, triggers, as you well know, the Article 5 protections where the alliance comes to the aid of all other countries. And so there are real risks in dangerous rhetoric. It's not just words and propaganda. Those things can have a subsequent risky effect. And so the White House is trying to be careful in how they're responding, to talk about this in ways that are a bit more muted, to say this is another predictable kind of action from Putin, that he would be someone who would be trying to ratchet things up, and reminding the public here that the U.S. has the ability to protect itself, also a nuclear power, and that this is the kind of thing that they are expecting from Putin. Andrea?
Indeed. And it's well worth remembering that Ukraine had a nuclear force. In fact, most of the Soviet Union's forces, the nuclear strategic forces, were in Ukraine, and Ukraine voluntarily gave them up, partly because of a lot of pressure and the non-nuclear legislation that went through the Senate from those two senators, and a huge movement in the 90s. Thanks so much to all of you for starting us off, particularly to Cal and to Keir, who are there on the front lines of this emerging rising crisis. And joining us now, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, and retired four-star General Barry McCaffrey. General McCaffrey, let me start with you. How worried, if at all, should we be about Putin suddenly placing his nuclear deterrent forces on alert and telling the world about that? Is this bluster?
Oh, it's very strange. Very strange, Andrea. Can you imagine how the Russian population is receiving this news? Anyone with an IQ over 80 knows that essentially a nuclear exchange is not possible. You can't first strike the United States and knock out a retaliatory capability. So Putin's telling his own people, I'm willing to vaporize much of Russia over a stalled invasion of a friendly sovereign state. This is some very nutty behavior. He's scared. He's getting dangerous. He should not use that rhetoric. It will assist in rallying the global community against what he's doing. By the way, I do think that essentially time is an ally of the Ukrainians, and Russian casualties are an ally of the Ukrainians. So he's got a real problem. I'm somewhat surprised at how lethargic the Russian offensive is. They have overwhelming preponderance of force. But I think part of their problem is there's 100 lines of communication now into the Russian people and their operating armed forces saying the global community has turned against them and we're not doing too well against these brave Ukrainians.
And it's unclear to me, when he's talking about the nuclear deterrent force, is he talking about his strategic weapons, those that he uses against the U.S., or is he talking about tactical theater weapons? What is he talking about? Is he talking about using a nuclear weapon against partisans in Ukraine?
Well, they have no utility. The Russians and the U.S. And the French all have tactical nuclear weapons. And they're woven into the doctrine of deterrent warfighting to show that you could fight across a range of levels of conflict and employ nuclear weapons as a deterrence argument. But these are political discussions. They're not, no right-thinking lieutenant colonel in the Russian armed forces, Air Force, or U.S. or anywhere else thinks it's a viable option. How you get rid of them, how you manage nuclear weapons is another question. So again, I think it's a function of a stalled conventional military operation going on in Ukraine with increasing casualties. But the major battle is NATO coming together as a unified force, 100,000 U.S. troops now in Europe and NATO, 4 deployed to the eastern NATO countries. This is not going to look good.
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear the last part of what General McCaffrey was saying because our ambassador at the UN is speaking at this moment at the Security Council. Let's listen.
In the General Assembly. The Council members who supported this resolution recognize that this is no ordinary moment. We need to take extraordinary actions to meet this threat to our international system and do everything we can to help Ukraine and its people. Just this morning, President Putin put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert, even though he is invading a country with no nuclear weapons and is under no threat from NATO, a defensive alliance that will not fight in Ukraine. This is another escalatory and unnecessary step that threatens us all. We urge Russia to tone down its dangerous rhetoric regarding nuclear weapons. These are issues that affect all member states. And now in the General Assembly, they can all make their voices heard on Russia's war of choice. We will then vote on a resolution that will hold Russia to account for its indefensible actions and for its violations of the UN Charter. As we speak, rockets continue to rain down on Kyiv and across Ukraine. Tanks are tearing through cities. Russia readies still more brutal weaponry. Bombs that flatten cities and indiscriminately target civilians for an unjustifiable assault fabricated out of lies and the rewriting of history. Russia also propagates outrageous lies about Ukraine's conduct in its own defense. We are alarmed
this
by the
what?
mounting reports of civilian casualties, videos of Russians' forces moving exceptionally lethal weaponry into Ukraine, and the widespread destruction of civilian facilities like residences, schools, and hospitals. To the Russian officers and soldiers, I say, the world is watching. Photographic and video evidence is mounting, and you will be held to account for your actions. We will not let atrocities slide. Those of us here, safely sitting in this hallowed hall, have a moral responsibility to respond to Russia's desecration of human life. That means humanitarian aid, like the thermal blankets USAID has already airlifted to tens of thousands of Ukrainians in need, and the recently announced $54 million in additional humanitarian assistance that will reach hundreds of thousands more. That means military support, including the additional $350 million of security assistance the United States is shipping to Ukraine.
With this thing.
And it means holding the sole aggressor, Russia, accountable for its actions. That will take some courage from some fellow member states, and I know that. They have shown strength. By the inspiration, I would like to stress, for the inspiration, I would ask you to look to the Ukrainian people. They have shown strength, courage, and resilience in the face of Russian guns and soldiers and bombs and rockets. They also maintain the courage to sit down and talk. We welcome their continued willingness to participate in peace talks. On Friday night, darkness descended on Kyiv. Missiles attacked a sheltering city. But the next morning, Ukrainians woke up to a new citizen, a baby girl born to a mother in a bomb shelter. The baby's name is Mia. Photos of her tiny hand gripping her mother as they hid underground have inspired the world. Let us have the courage of Mia's mother. Let us have the courage of the Ukrainian people standing bravely to defend their democracy, their way of life, and their futures. Let us show them that they are not alone, that the world stands behind them, that the United Nations has a purpose, that the additional bravery of the protesters in Russia is not in vain. Let us do everything we can to help the people of Ukraine as they stand up for themselves, for their sovereign country, and for their children. Thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Албании.
And that, of course, was Linda Thomas Greenfield, the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, really laying out what the stakes are for the world, what the stakes are for Russia, given the threats, and mentioning also that nuclear threat that we were just discussing with Barry McCaffrey, with General McCaffrey. I was about to ask Ambassador McFaul and Ambassador Taylor and General McCaffrey to also comment on that. Ambassador McFaul, someone who knows Vladimir Putin well, who speaks Russian. You first met him, I think, in 2008 or perhaps earlier.
1991, Andrea.
A lot earlier.
I've been around a long time, yeah.
You've been studying him for years, so what does he mean by talking about his nuclear deterrent?
Well, I mentioned that because I've known about him for a long time, met him, written about him, sat in the room for 5 years with him. Every senior U.S. government official that met with him in the first 5 years of the Obama administration, I was there. I've read and listened to many speeches, and this President Putin is becoming increasingly unhinged. I listened to this speech 10 times, the one where he talked about nuclear weapons. This is not business as usual. This is not the normal, if you do this, we do that. This was something different. And I urge people, even if you don't speak Russian, to look at his Minister of Defense and his the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the two generals there, when he was saying it, look at their faces. This was serious. And I think we need to take it seriously. Now, it doesn't mean we overreact. Obviously, there's something called mutual assured destruction. Mr. Putin knows that. But I do think it is incumbent upon the U.S. administration using back channels. General Milley should be calling his counterpart, Mr. Gerasimov. Secretary Austin should be calling his counterpart, Minister Shoigu, and just to be reassured that this is just bluster. And that they do affirm, they just signed a resolution, by the way, just a few weeks ago, that we all agree that nuclear war is completely forbidden. But even if it's just if it's a 0.2% probability, 0.02% probability, we want it to be a 0.01% probability and move it that way. But the second point I want to make about it, Andrea, is I think it's illustrative of how isolated he is. He's been disconnected for a long, long time. Even when I was ambassador, I left in 2014. Even way back then, he just sat out at his dacha. He never listened to anybody. He has nobody to tell him, Mr. President, I think you're going too far here. He's completely disconnected from society. He has zero connection with the society now. And out in the world, basically has Xi Jinping as the only person he respects. And as a result of that, I think he's making really bad decisions. And that is worrisome to me.
Ambassador Taylor, as someone who has been in Ukraine next door, you know Zelensky so well, the world has been extraordinarily impressed by his courage and his ability to rally his people. Can you explain also why he would agree to go to the Belarus border, where Belarus has been a staging area, where Lukashenko has been, Lukashenko has been an ally of Putin, a military ally? Why would he he wouldn't do that himself, but why would he send a delegation?
Andrew, you're right. President Zelensky has shown remarkable courage, remarkable leadership, remarkable focus, remarkable determination. I mean, he has really stepped up, exactly what you say. And it's true what you say, that the world community, the international community has noticed this and respects this. But even more important, Andrea, it's how he's leading his country and how he's unifying his country. I've had conversations today, yesterday, with people of all kinds, people who are out on the street defending Kyiv, people who are in opposition. They are all honored. In particular, the fellow that I was talking to who was out on the streets with his weapon, he and his colleagues are honored to be led by this man. So that he's really stepped up. You asked the question, why should he send a delegation to the border? Well, first, of course, the proposal that President Putin made, the Russians made, was to send a delegation to Minsk, to the capital of Belarus. And President Zelensky turned it down flat. That was just not even serious. To send a delegation to the border, the Pripyat River, is an indication that the Ukrainians are looking for every way to be able to defend their country and defend their principles and defend their sovereignty, but be open for conversations, open for a negotiation. This has to end in some kind of negotiation. It's not going to end in a battle, in militarily. This is going to end in a conversation, which probably the Russians are going to back down after they have been slowed and they have had their nose bloodied. But in any case, it's going to be a negotiation. And the negotiation is going to be in Pripyat. It could have been in Israel. I think President Zelensky suggested that it be in Israel as a more neutral place that has links to both sides. But on the border, on the river, one side of the other river is a reasonable place to go.
And suggesting Israel, after having been accused of being a Nazi, a Jewish president, shows at least he hasn't lost his irony or his sense of humor. Thank you so very much to all of you. General McCaffrey, of course, Ambassador Taylor, and we'll be seeing you in just a few moments, Ambassador McFall, checking back with you throughout the hour. But first, as we've been reporting, Russian President Putin ordering his nuclear deterrent forces on high alert. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki reacted to the escalation earlier today with MSNBC's Jonathan Capehart.
This is exactly the kind of manufactured threats that President Putin has been using since the beginning of this crisis to justify further aggressive action. What is fact here is that Russia is under no threat from NATO, has never been, is under no threat from Ukraine, has never been. It is Russia and President Putin who are taking the aggressive action.
And joining us now is former CIA Director John Brennan. Director Brennan, what is your reaction to Vladimir Putin's announcement about the nuclear deterrent and also the way he's been behaving, the way he's been prosecuting this war so far?
Well, I think he's trying to intimidate the West by saber-rattling his nuclear capability. I think that's what he's been doing over the past several weeks as far as, again, trying to intimidate the West into not responding the way it has to the situation in Ukraine, which is why so many people, myself included, didn't think he was going to go forward with this full-scale invasion because of the tremendous consequences on the battlefield as well as financially, economically, and internationally he was going to face. And so, unfortunately, I think it looks as though Vladimir Putin has been blind to reality and has badly miscalculated what we would do in response. I hope it's a miscalculation as opposed to his anticipation of this chain of events, because I would hate to think that he's going to use this pretext of the situation in Ukraine for an existential confrontation with NATO. But I do think that he has been slowed, but only if he stops this Russian war machine and reverses course will we be able to step down from what appears to be a very dangerous escalatory spiral, which has unknown future ahead of us.
It's very clear, given the lopsided David and Goliath, if you will, matchup here, that once Putin, if he does decide to throw everything at Ukraine, he can conquer Ukraine in terms of the fourth strength, the numbers of his forces. He would have to decide to get his men out of the tanks and go, apartment to apartment and take huge civilian losses, with a big reaction in Russia where the familiar relationships between the two populations are very close.
He can degrade, without a doubt, the Ukrainian military and probably destroy most of it, but he's not going to be able to destroy the Ukrainian resistance. I mean, we've seen the inspirational leadership of President Zelensky, which has basically called the people of Ukraine together to oppose this invading force. And so the costs that the Russian military has already incurred and is likely to incur, I think, is going to be astronomical from the standpoint of the political repercussions in Russia. And we see already the demonstrations, the protests. But I would think that the people around Putin, who may have been in league with him up till now, are recognizing that this is a no-win situation. So as others before me have said, I think that Putin right now is in a very desperate position and may become even more reckless. And so that's why I think we need to do everything possible to respond to his efforts to intimidate the West and to continue to rally support and to let Mr. Putin know that this is not going to be tolerated. Putin is evil. The Russian people are not evil. And the more we can cast this as Putin's war as opposed to Russia's war. And that's why I think Ambassador Greenfield's comments to the UN were so important. So to direct it to the Russian people that this is something that is not, in fact, what it is that they want or need at this time. And we're hoping that the Russian people are going to recognize that Mr. Putin is putting them on a path to destruction, and the sooner that he is pushed away from that path, the better for all concerned.
We've seen protests in Russia a couple of years ago with the opposition coalescing, or if you will, around Alexei Navalny, so all the opposition groups. And there was talk at the time that this could be the undoing of Vladimir Putin, and then he crushed them. And it just, by jailing Navalny, attacking him again, then jailing him, imprisoning him under those false charges, as well as taking out the other leaders, making it illegal to protest, to be a part of any of these groups. So are these protests as ephemeral, or is something else really happening in Russia?
Well, the word unprecedented sometimes.
here you go. It's from.
I really think it applies to the situation right now. This is an unprecedented situation
Vivo.
in terms of Russia's invasion in Ukraine
clamp
and the
on
international
keyboard.
response
Right.
and the pariah status that Putin and Russia are now assuming. We see that BP has moved away from its Russian investments. There is going to be repercussions across the board, and so therefore, I think the Russian people are already feeling it in terms of how the ruble has toppled and the impact it's going to have on the availability of goods and services. And I think we're going to be seeing the departure of foreign investors, others. And so, again, I think this has no precedent in previous recent Russian history. And that's why I think these protests and demonstrations are only destined to get more violent, more widespread, and have very direct, I think, political repercussions on Putin's fortunes and his future. And I don't see him coming out of this in any shape at all.
Not bad.
Thanks so much, Director Brennan. You're an invaluable
Not
asset
bad at all.
as we
Gives me
discuss
more
this.
room now.
Having watched
I don't have to keep that
Vladimir
keyboard up
Putin
here
for so
anymore.
many years. Thank you very much.
Cool.
And we've been keeping a close eye on the UN Security Council, and what they did too was vote after you saw Linda Thomas-Greenfield. So what they did was vote to pass this resolution condemning Russia onto the General Assembly.
There you go.
Tomorrow. The vote against, there was a veto from Russia, and again, China, India, and the United Arab Republic abstained. And because there were already 9 votes to pass it to the General Assembly for consideration tomorrow, that Russian veto did not negate it. So the resolution proceeds to the General Assembly, where there is expected to be a large majority in favor of condemning Russia, despite its leadership of the Security Council, which will end Monday night. Across the world, people have taken to the streets to protest Russia's invasion of Ukraine, exactly the way it's even happening in Russia. On Friday, more than 100,000 people in Berlin standing in solidarity with Ukraine in front of the historic Brandenburg Gate. In Istanbul today, hundreds, including many Ukrainian expatriates, singing Ukraine's national anthem and urging the world to stand with Ukraine.
It's my
of course, the
cable.
now iconic blue and yellow flags. While in Paris,
cable
crowds gathered in
organizer.
the Place de la République Square Saturday night for an end to the Russian invasion. At nightfall, the City of Lights honored the people of Ukraine
These
by
are for
bathing the
cables.
Eiffel Tower in blue and yellow.
Organizing
Up
your
next,
cables.
the confirmation fight. Will it be a fight? What Republicans are saying about the president's choice for the Supreme Court. If you're watching a special edition, a weekend edition of
when I get
Andrea Mitchell
bored.
Reports, this is
I'll
MSNBC.
organize my cables. And let's put that over there for right now.
Type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure, you're a target for chronic
They really sent chills down the spines of very many Russians, too, taking to social media and saying, we've got this nuclear threat, we have the Chechen leader joining the fight, we've got the Belarusian president backing up President Putin. What is going on? People just need to start taking to the streets and voicing their opinion. But to clarify a little bit more or give a little detail on what President Putin said, Brett, for people who haven't heard it yet, he was meeting his chief of general staff and his defense minister. It's Special Forces Day, so there was a message to those troops from the president, and he said that he felt that the sanctions against Russia were illegitimate, that the language of NATO had been threatening, and for that reason, Russia was going to put its nuclear forces onto a status of high alert. Here's exactly what he said, Brett.
Top officials in NATO's leading countries have been making aggressive statements against our country. For this reason, I give orders to the defense minister and the chief of the general staff to introduce a special combat service regime in the Russian army's defense forces.
You may remember, Brett, just a few days before this war began, after the series of supposedly military exercises that were going on around Ukraine were supposedly starting to wind down, there was this big nuclear exercise that President Putin announced at the last minute, and they showed off the entire arsenal there in tests in remote parts of the country. And tonight on the main news show, the sort of talk show, the most popular, the Kremlin's favorite show host was showing those weapons off again, saying that they had the capability to wipe out the United States and NATO together. They didn't want to be in a world, they said, without Russia in it, Brett.
Amy Kellogg, live in Moscow. Amy, thank you. We're going to have team coverage on the ground from Ukraine as Ukrainian forces brace themselves for another tense night. Residents in different parts of Ukraine are preparing for war. We now go to Benjamin Hall, who joins us in Ukraine's cultural capital of Lviv. Benjamin.
Yeah, hi, Brett. You know, we've spoken to a lot of experts over the last few days who talk about a potential Russian occupation of this country and how it would not be sustainable for them. It would bleed them dry. It would cost a lot of money. Well, one of the reasons is that the civil defense forces are so prepared for a resistance. Earlier today, we spoke to one of the potential leaders of this who would step in were that to be the case. She's doing a lot now. Take a look. We drove to the outskirts of Lviv, down bumpy roads to a nondescript house on the edge of a field. There we met Natalia Kuba, a mother and IT consultant, suddenly thrown into the middle of this invasion, now coordinating the civilian resistance. I wondered if you could just describe to us what exactly is happening with this coordination, this rising up of the people.
You know, we are on our independent land. So we are free people, and freedom is our main value. So we are united. So there is no government and people just separate groups of people. So we are united. We cooperate in any possible way.
And I just wonder then, with that in mind, Russia maybe didn't understand that when they came here, they were taking on more than just the army.
Absolutely. So we have almost 40 million people who would like to fight Russia. You know, maybe they expect us to, that they will have something they had in Crimea when we were, in crisis, and they come and they just take, and everything was smooth for them. However, now they are in hell, and they would like to take our land. They will be buried inside that land.
But can a group of civil defenders, civilians, can they hold back the Russian army?
We have a tradition of resistance, local resistance here. And, the first thing is about motivation. So we are, super motivated.
I was going to ask you, what motivates you to rise up, to risk your family, to do this now?
The quality of my future and future of my children. So I would like to be a part of modern democratic world.
How far are you willing to go? How much are you willing to sacrifice for this fight?
Anything which is needed for us to win. So we have a lot of people who have no doubts to go in a center of conflict and protect every part of our land. This can cost our lives. However, we know this, and we are not terrified. We on our own land. Just leave us alone and go away from here, because you will die here.
And Brett, it's absolutely fascinating to see, as she said, there's no government and people. They are symbiotic here. They've been fighting the Russians in their eyes for many, many years, since 2004, when Russia first invaded parts of this country. The money that they raise goes towards buying weapons for the army. It is remarkable to see, and everyone we speak to says the same thing. They will pick up weapons, they will fight the Russians, and an occupation would seem a surefire way for Vladimir Putin to lose in the long run. Brett?
Benjamin Hall, live in Lviv. Benjamin, thank you. Just moments ago, the U.S. State Department says U.S. citizens in Moscow, in Russia, should consider departing Russia immediately. That's not just in Ukraine, that's in Russia, from the State Department. Meantime, analyzing Vladimir Putin. Is he well? The intel community is assessing that. We'll talk about it.
It's electric, made extraordinary. Ingenuity in motion. It listens, learns, adapts, and anticipates your every need. With intelligence that feels anything but artificial. The EQS from Mercedes-Benz. It's the car electric has been waiting for.
People everywhere living with type 2 diabetes are waking up to what's possible with Rybelsus.
The majority of people taking Rybelsus lowered their blood sugar and reached an A1C of less than 7. Rybelsus isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't take Rybelsus if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer, or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, or if allergic to it. Stop Rybelsus and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects.
Being assigned to the poorest, to the people who are trapped in the system. You don't choose the innocence or guilt of the people to whom you're assigned.
In the United States, in Europe, and other parts of the world. Of course, this would also upset some of Russia's close partners here, and namely, I'm thinking about China. So that's a very real constraint on this strategy. But certainly, it's an option that Russia has if it really is willing to jeopardize the long term for the short term.
Fascinating. A lot at stake. Megan O'Sullivan, Jason Bordoff, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. All right, straight ahead, I'll talk to the last foreign TV reporter in Kharkiv as this firefight continues to go on. She and her cameramen are holed up in their hotel in a makeshift shelter with plywood protecting the windows. Stay with us.
Get a head start in investing with the new Schwab Starter Kit. New investors can open an account and get $50 to split across the top 5 stocks in the S&P 500. You can also unlock short videos, step-by-step guides, and other easy-to-use tools designed for people just getting started. Plus, investment professionals are on standby 24/7 if you ever have a question. It's the smarter way to start investing.
Looking to get back in your type 2 diabetes zone? Once weekly Ozempic can help. Ozempic is proven to lower A1C. Most people who took Ozempic reached an A1C under 7 and maintained it. And you may lose weight. Adults lost on average up to 12 pounds. In adults also with known heart disease, Ozempic lowers the risk of major cardiovascular events such as heart attack, stroke, or death.
Ozempic helped me get back in my type 2 diabetes zone.
Ozempic isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't share needles or pens or reuse needles. Don't take Ozempic if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2 or if allergic to it. Stop Ozempic and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Ozempic with a sulfonylurea or insulin may increase low blood sugar risk.
A brave, powerful message from one of the innocent children caught in the war between Russia and Ukraine, leaving Ukraine, leaving his father. Regular civilians like this young boy's father are gearing up to defend their country from Russian invaders, while thousands of Ukrainian refugees are fleeing their homes to seek safety in neighboring nations. Now we have the mayor of Kyiv saying it's too late. You can't leave the capital city because we are encircled by Russian forces. Meantime, there's a lot of analysis about Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is he well? Is he losing it? What is the assessment of the Russian leader? Former CIA chief of station and Fox News contributor Dan Hoffman joins me now. Dan, I talked about it with the ambassador from Great Britain. I've talked about it. Condi Rice referenced it, how it's a different Putin. What are your thoughts here?
So I spent a lot of years of my career at CIA trying to see the world through the twisted KGB eyes of Vladimir Putin, and I can tell you that there's nothing more important to the Biden administration right now, or our NATO allies, than understanding the plans and the intentions of our adversary, Vladimir Putin, and understanding his psychological well-being. There's no question that his risk calculus has changed. This is not like an invasion of Ukraine in 2014, or of Georgia in 2008, or the victory over Chechnya shortly after Putin became president. He's altered his strategy and risk calculus so significantly. I thought it was quite telling when Senator Rubio today said that he couldn't go into details because
Let me read that.
out of concern for sources and methods.
Let me read that. Just the other day, Rubio tweets this: "I wish I could share more, but for now I can say it's pretty obvious to many that something is off with Putin. He's always been a killer, but his problem now is different and significant."
Ukraine. Zelensky won a landslide victory over incumbent Petro Poroshenko in 2019.
His background, he's Jewish, and he was very comfortable in what's called the Russia world. He made a great career for himself as a comedian and a businessman, in part by appealing not just to Ukrainians, but also to Russians.
Just a few months into his presidency, Zelensky became enmeshed in the scandal that led to then-President Donald Trump's first impeachment trial. A phone call in which Trump leaned on Zelensky to investigate allegations of corruption against Joe Biden's family in Ukraine. Allegations that were never supported by any evidence. Zelensky made no promises on the call and later denied Trump pressured him.
He handled it well because he understood that what he's being asked was outrageous.
But this crisis makes the Trump phone call seem almost trivial. This was the 44-year-old president's message to his country on Thursday.
The enemy has marked me as target number 1, my family as target number 2. They want to destroy Ukraine politically by destroying the head of state.
According to Axios, Zelensky told EU leaders in a video conference Thursday, quote, "This might be the last time you see me alive." How enormous is the pressure he's under right now?
It's really tremendous. I mean, he, to a certain extent, is alone, and it's clear that the Russians have put a target on his head, so I certainly don't envy the position he's in.
By Friday night, Zelensky's warning to his nation was dire.
This night will be very difficult, and the enemy will use all available forces to break the resistance of Ukrainians.
Is he in over his head overall?
You need a real, like, Churchill-type leader to excel at a moment like this. I think he is scrambling and trying to find the right tenor and the right message.
Even top Russian officials won't flat-out deny that Volodymyr Zelensky is in danger. When asked by CNN, "Do you intend to decapitate the Ukrainian leadership?" Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov didn't say no, saying only, quote, "Nobody is going to attack the people of Ukraine." Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
My next guest has not been able to leave the hotel where she's been covering these events in Ukraine, detailing what she can witness through cracks in the windows. Daria Stomatova, joining me live now from Kharkiv. She works for CNN Czech affiliate, CNN Prima News. Daria, so glad you could be with us. I hope you continue to be safe. What have you and your crew been experiencing from where you are right now?
Cracking. That's why I think it's important for President Biden to speak to Russian citizens, the Russian military, and Vladimir Putin at the State of the Union.
Just to reiterate, the U.S. State Department is saying that all American citizens should leave Russia now. The French Foreign Legion just said all French citizens should leave Moscow now. I mean, that is a warning specifically dealing with citizens in Russia. It's a different ballgame. Dan, very quickly.
It is. Look, we've got U.S. citizens who are right now in jail in Moscow. And the State Department is saying we cannot protect you from Russia's vicious cruelty against our citizens. Look at what they're doing to their own citizens who are seeking to protest and having their civil human rights violated on a regular basis.
Dan Hoffman, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
How the war in Ukraine and tough sanctions against Russia are adding to the roller coaster ride of your 401k. What's the deal? Next.
With cyber attacks on American financial institutions, if the price of energy goes up even higher. So the president may take a longer speech. I don't know, but clearly he has got to take this into account. This has to be front and center.
And Richard, also, we've heard, praise for Vladimir Putin's strength from Donald Trump, and this would not be happening if I were president, and also from Mike Pompeo and others in some corners of the Republican Party. It's being used on Russian TV as propaganda.
Well, the reason it wouldn't have happened probably on Mr. Trump's watch and Mr. Pompeo's watch is Vladimir Putin had no reason to do it. If the fruit is falling from the tree, If your enemy is in the process of undermining the NATO alliance, why would you do anything to get in his way? The reason, in part, it's happening now is that Mr. Putin had to deal with a very different situation. And I think he felt that there was a certain window to act. And I'd say, Andrea, he has underestimated the opposition at every step. He underestimated the United States. He clearly underestimated Germany and Europe. He clearly underestimated his opposite number in Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And by the way, and Mike McFaul would know this better than anybody, I think he's clearly underestimated his own people. He's so removed from the pulse of his own society. I think he didn't understand that what he has wrought has brought about something most Russians don't want.
Mike McFaul, quickly, do you think that the calls from General Austin and Milley, to their counterparts will have any impact at all? Can they get through to Vladimir Putin?
Well, on the nuclear issue, yes. I think we need reassurance from them that this is talk. It's not real, and that would normally happen under conditions of war. That was a channel, by the way, we used with the Russians during the Georgian war. But will it get Putin to change his mind about the war in Ukraine? Absolutely not. He's dug in. He will not change his mind. There will be no sanctions that'll change his mind. But I want to just really underscore something Richard said. I think he's absolutely right. Putin has misjudged Europe, the United States. He's really misjudged Mr. Zelensky, President Zelensky, and he's misjudged his own people. And that's because he sits out there not talking to anybody, not listening to anybody. And now he's been alone for years, and we're seeing the consequences of that isolation.
Well, he may be a lot more isolated given the reactions of the EU and some of the rest of the world. Thanks so much, Richard Haass, and of course, Ambassador McFaul, and stay with us for the next hour. But Russia's attack on Ukraine could cause severe spikes in energy prices across the globe. Oil prices have already jumped, surpassing $100 a barrel in Brent crude on Friday for the first time since 2014. Joining us now is Megan O'Sullivan, former special assistant to President George W. Bush and former deputy national security advisor for Iraq and Afghanistan, on the board of Raytheon Technologies as well. So we're learning today.
What does this say to you about what you are all experiencing together and how you're trying to stay unified?
Yes, it's very important to be here right now, and of course with the people we are staying with in this hotel, it actually feels that we are friends. They are supporting each other, we are telling stories. Actually, when we go outside and we experience something and come back, they are asking what you saw, what you heard, where you've been, are you afraid? So it's very nice, and also